The title is as written. I, I'll try to think about Central Europe from the perspective firstly, from the perspective very Polish and very connected with literature, because I'm a historian of literature. So from the large part of my lecture, it will be about literature and culture. No one can exhaustively and definitely answer the question of how many countries are included in Central Europe, because it is not clear what determines the membership. Certainly, Polish society has a similar history as Hungarian, Czech, Slovak, and many others in this part of the continent. Having common history, they do not have a common language. Also, they are not joined by common political or cultural representations. It seems, however, that in the mid-80s, one feature emerged connecting all countries included in Central Europe. It was a common goal to join the European Union or the Western Europe. But now, in 2025, it has been clear for a decade that this aspiration has taken a separatist character. Three main Central European countries, Poland, Czech, Hungary, would like to remain in the European Union, but on a separate basis, without strong obligations and without complying with a uniform policy. My lecture, although submitted to the rigor of a small volume, will discuss the basic factors responsible for the crisis in common geography. To achieve this goal, I propose to divide the whole period into three shorter stages. But first, I'd like to present shortly some Polish cultural initiatives linked to Central Europe and devoted to integrating different societies through culture. What do we see? Well, I will not read it. It's up to you. These are informations. I will not discuss them. I will not make any comments because I will refer to them at the end of my lecture. So now these are only examples. So Borderland of Arts, Cultures and Nations created by Krzysztof Czyżewski, the Czarne Publishing House founded by Andrzej Stasiuk and Monika Schneiderman. Next, the Angelus Literary Award. If you are interested, please read it. This is one of the main literary awards in Poland, in Polish literary life. Then Festival of Central Europe Theatres in Lublin, first edition of Central European Film Festival. Endemity Festival in Poznań, Książkowe Klimaty, and so on and so on. One should mention that they are numerous. They are different to the size, bigger, smaller, medium size, but they value above all the multiplicity of cultures in Central Europe, its richness, and the connectivity. And now, the central part of my lecture. Central Europe emerged from historic oblivion in the mid-1980s due to Milan Kundera's essay, The Tragedy of Central Europe. In an essay, the Czech writer depicted the drama of Poles, Czechs, and Hungarians who, due to the Yalta decisions, found themselves under the domination of Soviet Russia. disagreeing with their detachment from Western Europe, they raised revolts in Hungary and Poland in 1956, in Poland and the Czech Republic in 1968, in Poland in 1970 and in 1980. The reason for the rebellions was to experience the difference between their own cultural heritage and the new political post-war order. Central Europe is a multiplicity of nations, cultures, faith, and languages. The region did not use, in Kundera's terms, a force to solve conflicts because Central Europe embodied the principle, I quote, of maximum diversity at the minimum of space. Russia was built, according to Kundera, Russia was built on the opposite rule of, I quote, minimum diversity at the maximum of space. By building the opposition and basing it on an idealized image of Central Europe and a horrifying image of Russia, the writer did an unusual thing. He distinguished Central Europe from many countries oppressed by the Soviet Union, making it an internally coherent creation with its own traditions. He introduced to the pan-European debate the image of the area in which culture is authentic. He proposed a cultural and not political narrative that became the basis of the supranatural language of resistance to the Soviet Union. At the same time, he justified the Ravindic attitude toward the West in this way. In his view, Soviet Russia turned out to be a colonizer of culturally alien spaces, and Western Europe turned out to be a traitor who, in exchange for security and satiety, abandoned the younger sister. Despite the simplifications, or thanks to it, Kundera turned geopolitics into geopolitics into geopoetics. Throughout the post-war period, the map of Europe was hostage to ideological determinants. The alliances were based on recognizing the immutability of borders, and so on, the inviolability of narrative. The essay on Central Europe launched the imagination, and the map turned out to be a derivative of the story, not of the politics. Central Europe, in the shape repainted by Kundera, was an expression of longing for the former, stable, peaceful, and safe world of bourgeois Europe. This longing led them believe that war, the Holocaust, and communism were only a suspension of time, a break after which the history would start again without interruption. In numerous polemics with the Kundera essay, the unified image of Russia and Russian culture was questioned. The idyllic image of Central Europe without violence was undermined. The area was extended to the Baltic states. However, despite the fact that the extent and identity threats were being squeezed, in the second half of the 1980s, entity known as Central Europe was considered a full-fledged inspiration. Neither the factuality of the story itself nor its usefulness in building Europe were questioned. The goal was accepted. The cultural geographical map told by Kundera led to the westernization of the eastern countries and thus to the acceleration of history, which should end with the rejoining of the center to the west. Since the categories embodied in such geopoetics were considered credible, then, after the collapse of the Soviet Empire and after regaining independence by the former dependent states, history began to move towards the direction set by Kundera. From the beginning of the 1990s, the history of Central Europe began to take place, which is a very rare case under the essay. In 1991, Poland, Czechoslovakia, since 1993, the Czech Republic and Slovakia formed an alliance called the Visegrad Group, which based new relations between states on a common cultural tradition. The same countries in 1992 created the CEFTA, Central European Free Trade Agreement, the first international alliance using the term Central Europe as a full-fledged political category. In 1994, Central European countries applied for membership of the European Union, signed the accession treaty in 2003, and 1 year later, officially, together with 7 other countries, were admitted to the European Union. So maybe this is first but very important lesson. The rebirth of Central Europe in postmodern times, in bright times, was a result of egoism practiced by egoists. 3 countries recognized themselves as the only representation of Central Europe. From the whole Central Europe, only them. Joining the pro-European orientation of the idea of the center with the victim status suggested by Kundera produced an image as inspiring as it was dangerous, since it led to thinking in unequivocal terms. Literature was able to maintain its independence only by undermining both the Central European myth and the myth of the unification of the center with the West. Half of this task was accomplished by novels that evoke the notion of Central Europe in order to undermine platitudes of unification. Their authors, Stefan Chwin, these are only examples. Stefan Chwin, as an author of Dolina Radości, The Valley of Joy, and Paweł Hille, as an author of Inne Historie, Other Stories, Mercedes-Benz, and Castorp, proposed a model for contesting the present and the forces prevailing in it from the perspective of Central Europe. They invoked Central Europe from the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries in a form provided by Kundera. Bourgeois, fair, not ideologized, practicing a fluid identity opposed to nationalisms and violence. This was a Europe of societies and cities, not Europe of states and nations. It was Europe capitalist, but exchanging money for art. Europe technologically advanced, but using innovation to enjoy life's pleasures. This Europe was to be a counterweight to present-day Europe, which in the novels of Chwin and Hille appears as a continent that is globalizing, disrespectful of local differences, consumerist and threatened by fundamentalism and nihilism. For present-day Europe, Central Europe from 100 years ago was meant to be a lesson in a different culture, useful in staving off postmodern dangers. It was a valuable and useful lesson of criticism, since the first concept of integration was expressed in the idea of assimilation. Nobody talked about local traditions because the prevailing tendency was to connect Central Europe with the European Union on the rights and according to rules already functioning in the Union. The problem was that such a connection was based on asymmetrical relations, on the difference of potentials and rationality. Thus, from the point of view of political and economic procedures, 2004 ended the previous striving for the institutional rooting of Central Europe in the Union. From the point of view of cultural and social processes, this end took on a completely different, chronic, and unexpected form. It might seem that there was no contradiction between the Central Europe's goals and the pragmatics of the European Union. But the impression or illusion could only be sustained in the central if the Central European map created by Kundera was undifferentiated. Andrzej Stasiuk drew another map. Andrzej Stasiuk is a Polish writer. The discursive gesture that prompted the writer's intervention into the debate surrounding the center was his publication, along with Yuri Andruchowicz, of the book Moja Europa, My Europe. In the essay in this volume entitled Dziennik Okrętowy, Ship's Log, Stasiuk describes the creation of his own Central European territory. And this is the quotation. The line runs more or less through Brest, Równe, Czerniowic, Cluj-Napoca, Arad, Szeged, Budapest, Żylina, Katowice, Częstochowa. It ends where it begins, that is in Warsaw. Inside that line is a chunk of Belarus, quite a lot of the Ukraine, substantial and comparable spaces in Romania and Hungary, almost the whole of Slovakia, and scarps of the Czech lands. And yes, around a third of the Polish fatherland. If we treat Stasiuk's conception here not just a private map, but also as a certain configuration of the consciousness of the inhabitants of Central Europe, we can notice several simple implications and several complex changes. One implication relates to the absence of Germany and Russia in the discourse of Europe of the center. If we ignore the few ideas from the 90s that looked at the Hansa cities and the community of cultures of the Baltic region, no one has ever really managed to speak about Germany as a part of Central Europe. Stasiuk confirms this absence when he makes it apparent that the ability to travel to Germany is not the same as feeling any connection with German culture. He writes in greater detail of this in his later book, Deutschland. The issue with Russia emerges in the same way. Not many people have any notion how to integrate Russia, and so the majority notes with a certain grim satisfaction the return of Russia imperialism, which justifies a pruning off the map. Ostensible arbitrariness of Stasiuk reveals the usurpation of Kundera. The Czech writer reached for the Austria-Hungarian history, but he didn't include Ukraine, Romania, Yugoslavia, and even Slovakia. He created Art Nouveau Arcadia, omitting the colonial process of birth and covering various slaughters. This is not a map of Kundera, but Stasiuk's cartography is closer to the historical reality. This is map of Austria-Hungary monarchy. Much, much closer to the map of Stasiuk. The serious change proposed by Stasiuk involves the center down the map. This shift results in a radical reversal of a tendency from the last 20 years. In the mid-1980s, an orientation of the map towards the west and against the east was an attempt to join Poland and the Czech lands, Slovakia and Hungary, to Western Europe. The Central European discourse suggested by Stasiuk establishes a space that is different from West and East. The former vector was horizontal, linking Central Europe with the culture of the Mediterranean. Stasiuk's vector runs vertically, southwards from Poland, and creates a territory of Central Europe, which he sets against both West and East. Thus, Stasiuk's Central European discourse constitutes a double separation and not an integration. In a series of books, Zima, winter, Jadąc do Babadag, on the road to Babadag, Fado, Deutschland, dziennik pisany później, diary kept afterwards, Stasiuk describes a new Europe, and setting it against Western Europe, he explodes myths of unification. when at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, the process of European unification began, all this was accompanied, to put it crudely, by three myths. The first said that the continent would be an administrative unity and a cultural diversity. The Europe of small homelands was to be an area in which during the daytime we would all build up capital, and in the evenings and for sure at weekends we would cultivate our local traditions. There would be a place for everyone in the process of modernization, but no one in this process should lose his or her identity. The second myth said that Western Europe could give us much, but also gain much from us in return for developed technology, inventions, and specialists. We would bring our spirituality to the common good. The exchange would be a just one. The disproportion of gifts would humiliate no one, and we were not to be ashamed of our poverty. After all, a historical settlement, a balancing was taking place. We were gaining a place in a powerful administrative structure, and the West would recall culture, the value of belief, the importance of metaphysical ties. We would get modernization, we would pass on spirituality. The third myth spoke of the fundamental identity of the whole area, a result of the common bourgeois democratic traditions and of a general consent to the only possible historical path, which was the drive to the West. In an abbreviated form, one that was frequently used, the argument was put forward that the truth of this part of Europe, that is the truth that is fundamentally belongs to the West, is expressed by the spiritual capitals, such as Lviv, Prague. We are in the hotel, which name is Prague. So Lviv, Prague, Budapest, Krakow, Wrocław, Warsaw, and so on, which retain the traces of all the epochs of European culture and all the destruction caused by wars or totalitarianisms. Meanwhile, Stasiuk writes, let's start from the end, that if there exists a truth of Central Europe, this can be seen not in the capitals, but in the provinces. There, in places no one has ever heard of. Where is Babadag? Who knows where is Babadag? In spaces of post-industrial clusterfuck, which is my favorite phrase, in the desert that really existing socialism left behind, there the truth of Central European life lies. It is the truth of the province and its inhabitants who, in the historical process, were always treated as colonial collectivities. The people living in this area were never vested in historical agency. Feudalism, the absolutist state, communism only meant new forms of supervision, pressure, or exploitation. They did not, however, after all, the fundamental relationship between the colonized majority and the colonizing minority. The Emperor Franz Joseph, who comes up in Stasiuk's narratives, is idealized not because he created Arcadian conditions for the coexistence of diverse nations, but because he interfered in their lives to a minimal degree. So Stasiuk convincingly argues that shoving the splendid cities of Central Europe under the noses of the Western European is a result of a provincial complex, a complex consisting of the province's sense of its own nothingness, but also a complex that compels a shame-driven covering up of vast territories of a cultural desert. Then, contrary to the myth of mutuality, Stasiuk says, the movement is in one direction only. The center expects money from the West from the center wants nothing at all. So there is no question of mutuality, not only because the rich give the impression of being satiated and superior, and so of being totally uninterested in receiving anything, but also, according to Stasiuk, because Central European spirituality is marked by consent to the transience and failure of human effort, and thus something which the West really doesn't want at all. Central European metaphysics, as Stasiuk understands is a physics of decay, agnostic acceptance of the destructive operations of time. The consequence is that a dialogue of European modernity with the spirituality of the center is an illusory one, and the modernization coming to Central Europe is really just modernization, an agglomeration of technical and administrative solutions calculated on weakening the role of the local cultures. Third, contrary to the myth of the administrative unity of a future Europe and its local diversity, Stasiuk stubbornly spins a tale of how a united Europe will not be so much a continent of small nations, but a territory of large concerns. Regions and cities will be spread out under the high totems of Esso, Mercedes, Volvo, Nestle, losing thereby not only a local but even a European character. Stasiuk thus reveals himself to be the anti-Kundera of Central European discourse. The Czech writer occidentalizes Central Europe. Stasiuk orientalizes it. For Kundera, it was a territory betrayed by the West. For Stasiuk, it is a territory betrayed by an elegant conception of Central Europe. For Kundera, and also for Chwin and Hülle, it is a reservoir of beautiful monuments. For Stasiuk, it is a rusting warehouse of socialist industry and a kiosk full of knockoffs of Western goods. For Georgi Konrad, Czesław Miłosz, Daniel Kisz, it was, above all, a bourgeois territory. For Stasiuk, just as for his great predecessors, Joseph Krautfort or Joseph Roth, it is a plebeian region. Proponents of integration spoke of Central Europe as an intermediary stage. Stasiuk treats it as an impassable one. Central Europe, extended as far as the Balkans, is, as Stasiuk sees it, a crooked mirror. The inhabitants of the center will never attain the level of civilization in the West, and the only gift that they can offer the West in any exchange is a parody of postmodernity. The center apes the West, since involuntarily it exposes the fact that through its unifying myths, the West has renewed its civilizing mission, and simultaneously that mission is just a technologically advanced version of the petit bourgeois background. After Stasiuk's interpolation, Central Europe found itself in a strange state, excessively stretched to the Central East-South area. It became an incoherent conglomerate, united by the community of faith, but not by culture. The writer insistently stressed that the center is a society that remembers the weakness of its own countries and the strength of foreign colonizers. This is an area overburdened with destruction from the communist period, held in the past by poor infrastructure and by underdeveloped small towns. It is a collective memory in which the semi-Slavish condition of the masses going through subsequent epochs has become established. The latest modernization comes here in the form of an excessive consumer offer and a lack of real help. Plebeian majority, provincial weakness, semi-peripheral dependence. This is the true face of Central Europe. Forget about this, and the process of unification is to arrange a parody of integration. Remembering this is to give the integration process a greater chance of being fulfilled. The sum of these features attests to the fact that Stasiuk orientalizes the center, and the Central Europe has changed into Central Eastern Europe. That is why the writer chooses Eastern and Southern area, which permit him to expose cultural exotica incomprehensible to the incomer, civilizational tardiness, poverty, and a specific passive activeness consisting in transforming life into a waiting, time of waiting. However, it is a purposeful activity directed against constraints related to European integration, globalization, and capitalism. Stasiuk recognizes in this way that Western European ambitions condemn the center to surrender to yet another process of colonization. The first colonization took place in the Habsburg era, that is during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Its essence was to minimize the interference of the authorities to preserve the state of provincial underdevelopment. The second colonization had a totalitarian character. After the Second World War, it assumed the form of a communist totalitarianism. The essence of a communist period was an attempt to reconcile social equality with accelerated economic development aimed at achieving independence from the West and capitalism. The fall of communism was synonymous with the fall of the idea of progress and equality. With this comes the third colonization, neoliberal one. It meant the withdrawal of the state from the mediation between the labor market and the employee. This strategy of the withdrawn state meant that the era of freedom for the stronger and equality for the better came. The postmodernism took the form of modernity without obligations and without its key ideas like equality, justice, progress, and solidarity. Therefore, Stasiuk collects signs of the wars, deploying Orientalization as a language of self-defense against neoliberalism and capitalism. For the writer, the obviousness of Central Europe is the unnamed post-colonial condition. He narrates this condition not in a regular essay, but in vagrant prose. His travel notes have a loose structure close to the diary. A monologue with a changing rhythm prevails in them, as if the author collapsed into a monotony of driving and woke up from it at stops. He travels compulsively and ecstatically. His trips have no plan and therefore no end. Scenes of meetings with the inhabitants of the Ukrainian, Romanian, or Albanian provinces take place in silence. What people could say to each other can be seen all around, so it doesn't have to be said. There is no idea in this prose. It is their contestation. The initial volumes, from On the Road to Babadag to Deutschland, were the praise of the freedom of the writer. On his behalf, the author rejected the universal European entity, believing that the nomadic community of the center would also be able to defend against it. In the last volume, Diary written later, Stasiuk observes the intensification of the renationalization process in Central Europe. The center, neither politically integrated with the West nor separate from it, slightly modernized, somewhat traditional, breaks down into separate parts. This can be called the state of internal divisions. And this is a double condition. First, European Union is divided into two Western and Central parts because Central Europe separates from the Union. And second, individual states in Central Eastern Europe isolate themselves from each other. There is no unity within Union, and there is no integrity within Central Eastern Europe. The integration ended with disintegration because the extension of Central Europe went far beyond the limits of integrational forces. I think that the way of creating relations between the Central Eastern European states and the Union stems from political imagination. And political imagination is the art of inventing a story. The purpose of such a story is to connect different societies to simulate the better whole and to connect different times to simulate the better future. In the context of these observations, serious differences between the first and the second policy can be explained in literary terms. The first stage, beginning in the mid-80s, was marked by a postmodernist burger novel. The term is an oxymoron, and this oxymoron expresses contradictory desires. The idea was to have multiplicity and unity, stable bourgeoisie and capitalism for all, security and Europe without borders, pluralism and a common system of values, regional identity and freedom from the communist past. Gradual disintegration has been deepening since the entry of Central European states into the European Union. 2015, that is the arrival of a wave of immigrants from Central Asia and Africa to the southern shores of Europe, reveals multiple divisions. In this year, neither Central Eastern Europe wants to obey Brussels instructions, nor does any Central Eastern European country want to help its neighbor. This was a shift from postmodern bourgeois novel to constellation narrative. One can find it perfectly expressed by the prose of, for instance, Joachim Topol, Dubravka Ugreshic, or Andrzej Stasiuk. A constellation narrative does not refer to any whole, because the authors do not see any of that. Their journeys are rather marking separate points on the map, which can only be joined with an ad hoc line. It is mostly the past that distorted and broke the unity. The past occurred a heavy burden with the Holocaust, the communism era, and the underdevelopment. You cannot free yourself of this by simply decreeing the unity of Europe, because the past creates a state of inferiority. The postmodernist bourgeois novel, led to the unification of Central Europe with the European Union. But the political narrative imagination behind this unification was also responsible for numerous errors and omissions, above all for abandoning the protective functions of the state. The constellation narrative corresponds to the stage of loss of illusions. Therefore, the literature of this period is marked by melancholy, which says that unity, that is coherent wholeness of Eastern Europe and of European Union and Central Europe, has never been possible in full and will never happen. Now we can go to the third stage. Let me remind you, first stage with its postmodern bourgeois narratives was aiming at connection of Central Europe with European Union. A key but deeply hidden assumption was that the past could not prove stronger than the present, and that the differences were weaker and less important than common values. The second stage occurred when it turned out that Central Europe connection with the Union entailed problems stronger than unifying solutions. The postmodern bourgeois novel was replaced by a constellation narrative because the cultural and political imagination were not able to create a unifying narrative. Europe, imagined as a unity, changes into a divided union. And state of belatedness, economic underdevelopment, asymmetry of countries, summarized into a tendency to autonomy. To say that there is no unifying narrative doesn't mean that there are no narratives at all. Let us look at some of them. I choose the ones that seem the most symptomatic of the previously outlined conflict resulting from insubordination. It will sound strange, but they are itinerary rather than literary. Here, Firstly, in recent years, work has been activated on the construction of transcontinental route, Rail Baltica. It is a greenfield railway infrastructure project to link Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, and going to Prague, maybe to Hotel Prague. With a European standard gauge rail line, providing passenger and freight service between the countries and improving rail connections between Central and Northern Europe. As one of the priority projects of the European Union, it should act as a catalyst for building the economic corridor in the northeastern Europe. Via Carpathia is a European-built international route of north-south relations, connected in stages between Klaipėda in Lithuania and Thessaloniki in Greece. The road will go through Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece, acting as a transport route leading along the eastern border of the European Union from Central Europe to Asia, crossing corridors leading from Western Europe to Russia and connecting through the Black Sea ports with the Traceka route. The route along the entire length is to have the parameters of the motorway or expressway. One may ask what two international routes have in common with literature. I think that they are narratives, and they belong to different and conflicted ideas of storytelling. Rail Baltica is a road that refers to countries belonging to the Baltic Sea basin. It has its geographical justification, and moreover, it is a part of railway web projected to link Northern and Central Eastern Europe with the rest of the continent. Rail Baltica, therefore, can be considered the first integration narrative constructed outside the core area of the dispute and beyond the collection of the conflicting values. Its aim is to connect in a non-forced way, to expand the common communication platform. It determinates nothing, but it strengthens and allows a lot. It is integration projected as a set of possibilities, not as a list of rules. Via Carpathia, as we see, differs greatly, not only because it is a route for cars. First of all, the difference concerns the model. Via Carpathia was planned as a vertical axis marking the eastern border of Europe, as the delimitation of Central Europe from the east. It seems significant that Belarus and Ukraine are excluded from this idea of Central Europe, while Greece and Turkey are included into it. Secondly, Via Carpathia intersects with transverse railway lines running from west to east, but it has the character of a development alternative and not a network integrating Central Europe with the European Union. In other words, Via Carpathia is a reinforcement of the isolationist strivings of Central Europe, both from the west and from the east. However, thirdly, there is a clear striving to connect countries belonging to the entire vertical axis. It is therefore the first action for the internal integration of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe on the rights and according to the rules dictated by this quasi-region itself. Of course, the plan is somehow naive, and the present progress of work at Via Carpathia is pathetic, 700 kilometers out of 4,000. But even if it overestimates the role of independent regional power, it symptomatizes the isolating trend. Thus, Rail Baltica belongs to the geocultural imagination of the first stage, whereas Via Carpathia, even if it is condemned to failure, belongs to the third one. It is intended to integrate eastern part of Europe as the entity or region independent of the European Union. one can read it as the concept of autonomous and isolated integration. But there is also a third narrative. Of course. A Nord Stream, which goes from Russia to Germany and was intended to provide Western Europe with natural gas, not Central and Western Europe, but only Western Europe. It was, as observer observed, it was the first pipeline, I quote, it was the first pipeline that bypassed Ukraine and Poland to deliver Russian natural gas directly to West Europe. This bypass is a very important metaphor in this geocultural idea. So I combined three narratives, Real Baltica, Via Carpathia, and Nord Stream. I will use the right to a mental shortcut and say that Rail Baltica is a narrative about integration without sovereignty. Via Carpathia is a narrative about sovereignty without integration. And Nord Stream is a narrative about integration without sovereignty and democracy within European Union. I refer to the book by Dani Rodrik, The Globalization Paradox. The author recognized that in the present world there is a conflict between democracy, globalization, and the autonomy of the state. To the discussion. I move it to the discussion. And the point. So this leads me to the final dilemma. At the beginning of the lecture, I listed numerous cultural activities for the integration of Central European communities. However, this richness or this wealth reveals a distinct problem, a real dilemma. If so many people won't make the difference, if so many people are practicing, are working for the better world, to make the world a better place, who is creating the dark times? Where does this boundless gap from, this vast gulf between the wisdom of the small centers of the world and the cruelty of the centers of the great? It seems to me that the most important values at the turn of the centers were freedom, globalization, access, openness. Now, in the third decade of the 21st century, the most important category is security, safety. All other political concepts, all other political values, equality, justice, solidarity, take a back seat. So I'm posing a question. Is it a strong opposition between making difference and dark times? Are making the world a better place in dark times a strong opposition? And if it is not a strong opposition, which must be our assumption, because after all, that is what we have met here for. So if making the world a better place and darkness don't form a sharp opposition, then we need to start asking questions. How did we make difference through the last decades? Is it possible that our differences were free of darkness? Maybe the main difference we fought for, that is Central Europe, is part of dark times. Maybe Central Europe is the partial maker of darkness, because the first stage produced economical differences mainly. Then the second stage made the cultural differences. That is why we have now ethnic qualities at the front stage, nationalism at the gates, and autocracy ahead of us. So now we can see better, not because we can see more clearly in the dark, but because we begin to see what we didn't see before. Maybe this is the only wisdom we can ever achieve. We are wiser for the dark matter. Now we have to carry this darkness through the time.
Thank you for such a rich talk. There are many things that can be said and perhaps should be said. But of course, for the lack of time, I won't be able to react to everything that I would like to. So I'll try and say two things that hopefully will be connected. And if they want, then yeah, what can I do? So the first thing I would like to comment on the history of the concept of Central Europe. And I think the kind of obvious thing to point out is, of course, that the concept of Central Europe is not the invention of Milan Kundera. Yes, but so anyway, this is not to argue about the details, but because I think there's a bigger historical point to be made. Of course, Central Europe, as far as I'm aware, it was proposed by Masaryk, of course, between the wars around 100 years ago. And it was proposed as a response to a German concept for roughly the same area. Germans came up with the idea that the lands between Russian Empire and German Empire are what they called Mitteleuropa. So Mitteleuropa was this no man's land, well, basically former Austro-Hungary, which in their eyes had no agency. It was basically a failed region, and they have to have some idea what to do with it. And of course, the political actors in the region tried to counter that. So Masaryk came up with the idea of Central Europe as precisely the opposite of this failed, impassive region, but active with its own culture, own civilization, etc. And he was not the only one. Some of you might know there was a concept of intermarium proposed by a Polish nationalist leader at the same time, basically with the same intentions, trying to propose something for this region as a separate, if you will, geopolitical entity that has its own civilizational proposal and that has its own agency. Why I say that and why I think it's important to remember that, because at the very birth, this concept of Central Europe is a function of and response to Western Europe. It does not exist without that. Perhaps we will invent it in the future, but so far it does not. It is a response to the West, somehow saying that you mischaracterize us, and the addressee is always the same. It's Western Europe or the West in a broader sense. And in that sense, it is not much different from the concept of Eastern Europe. And sometimes, perhaps justifiably, we use these terms interchangeably. Eastern Europe is, of course, an older concept than Central Europe. But again, it's a historical concept. It's not a metaphysical concept. It's invented, and it was in Przemysław's bibliography, a fantastic book by Larry Wolff, Inventing Eastern Europe. He tells the story how basically 17th, 18th century Western travelers came up with this idea of Eastern Europe as something that is basically, of course, geographically to the east from them, so geographically to the east from Paris and London. And most of the time they meant Poland and Russia. And what is important is that it was considered to be civilizationally and culturally lower than the West. So all these guys, 17th, 18th century, especially when they travel, they are suddenly crossing some imaginary border. For various travelers, it's a different place. But they suddenly realize, I left civilization, I left civility, I entered Eastern Europe. And that is the concept, which I think why it's important to remember, because it's still there. Importantly, Eastern Europeans accepted it. Eastern and Central Europeans accepted it. I think Eastern Europe agreed that it is lower civilizationally and culturally, and that's why we're playing this catch-up game. Our goal in this region, broadly, is of course to catch up. Even, ironically, in the Soviet times, the slogan was the same. Of course, we'll catch up and overtake. We'll catch up and overtake. So West is something that is there to be reached, and we are not the West precisely by the fact that we are not there. We haven't reached that, so we haven't arrived. And who is going to tell us that we arrived? Of course, those who are there. So they will somehow say, welcome, now you arrived, you are the West. So, yeah, you are not. Yeah, but I think that is, of course, with variations, but I think that is basically the narrative that we had. And the last 30 years of this region, 35 years, was, I think, the same story on steroids. Przemysław mentioned Visegrad group, which got together to reach one goal, to integrate into European Union, and then the unity collapsed and disintegrated because we felt we're there. The same was, I remember as a Lithuanian, Vilnius Declaration. 10 Eastern Central European countries got together to announce that they have the same goal, which was integrate in Eastern Europe. That was the one and only time when these 10 countries got together in Vilnius and spoke in one voice. Because afterwards, of course, when you think you reach that goal, you disintegrate. And for me personally, the moment when I started thinking that there's something wrong with this picture was the moment in February 2022. At the moment of the invasion, I had a project in France. I worked with some French people in a theater project. And I remember on the morning of the invasion, when we got together as a team, we had this tradition that we would have, each member of the team had to say good morning and to say how they're feeling to start the day. I remember, because I haven't slept that night, I thought I have to address these events in Ukraine. So I said that, I'm really worried, and that's what's on my mind. I remember everyone nodded really appreciatingly, in the sense that everyone heard the news and everyone was worried. But I really felt like some invisible wall has emerged. And the only guy with whom we really, so after the initial niceties and polite remarks, the only guy with whom we kind of continued discussing the situation in Ukraine was a Polish guy. Polish guy who lives an artist who lives in Paris since early 90s. But there were, us two somehow had this connection and the same sensibility that the French guys didn't have. And I say that because for me that's when I felt like there is something that with all my attempts and attempts of our collective attempts to escape this Eastern Europe, it's still there. It's a little bit like in The Godfather, when Michael Corleone says you think you're out and then they drag you back in. And that's when I started thinking that perhaps the whole idea of reaching the West was an illusion. An illusion in a very serious sense, that in the sense in which Kierkegaard, when he talks about forms of despair, he says that one of the forms of despair is desperately not wanting to be yourself. And the form of that despair is, of course, desperately wanting to be someone else. And I think part of the tragedy, to use Kundera's term, of Central Europe was precisely that, not wanting to be yourself, wanting to be someone else. Of course, the trick is when you realize that there is a more sophisticated form of despair, according to Kierkegaard. And that's desperately wanting to be yourself. That is when you suddenly discover yourself as a separate entity, and you start practicing with the passion and the fervor, which is really not authentic. You somehow start thinking that it is your duty to be what you are. You know, it's overdoing that. And I think in many ways we are at the risk of that. So that's one thing that I wanted to comment on. And another is a little bit more general, but it's connected to this question of identity. Maxime in the morning and then Anna later talked about fragility, which I think is extremely important when we talk about self-identity. But I also would like to suggest that really the term which we should be using is not fragility but vulnerability. And I think although a lot of times we use these terms interchangeably, I think they're very, very different. I think the term of fragility refers to some objective quality of a thing or object or person. You know, glass is fragile, and by that we mean that it's very easy to break. Person is not fragile. Person is vulnerable. Vulnerable in the sense that it has weaknesses, and that's the opposite of fragile, is that attacking those weaknesses doesn't mean that you will break the person. It means perhaps the opposite, that when you are aware of your own vulnerabilities, when you are aware of what your weaknesses are, that makes you stronger, because it's so much more difficult to break you. Maxime spoke very eloquently, precisely about his experiences. That he didn't use these terms, but he said about that we are becoming what we are. We are becoming what we are, and I think in that sense, it is connected to this experience of confronting your own weaknesses. You know, these weaknesses can become your fragility precisely when you don't acknowledge them, when you hide them, and then whoever attacks you might expose them, and then that's when you become fragile. But if you embrace your vulnerabilities, if you embrace your weaknesses, I think it's the opposite. That's what makes you much stronger. I think Ukrainian example is precisely about that, and I think perhaps that's the answer why they were not broken, although a lot of commentators expected that they wouldn't last as long as they did. I think it's precisely for that. And vulnerability, why I think it's also important, because it's relational. If fragility is objective, I think vulnerability is always in relation to someone. You're vulnerable in front of someone. And to be vulnerable in front of someone requires strength. And I thought about Andrei, who said, you know, the war deprived you of your privacy, which I can only imagine, but I can understand that. But I thought, you know, with all the connections of solidarity that you've created with the vulnerability which you project, and that doesn't show you as a weaker person, but precisely as a strong one. And I thought, you know, perhaps the war takes away the privacy, but it gives intimacy of solidarity among, and at least that's what I observe when I'm in Ukraine. The solidarity of Ukrainian people, of course, the solidarity others who support. That is an extremely intimate relation which can be only among people who dare to be vulnerable in front of each other. So I'll stop here.
Well, what to say, what to start from. I'm personally, I'm extremely tired with the concept of Central Europe, and there is a disagreement and discord with this in me. I do not recognize myself at all in any of the concept of Central Europe. Me as a Central European, this is something what I can say about me for sure. If I'm certain about my features, so I'm certain that I'm human being, I'm certain that I'm Central European, and other things are more consequences of some circumstances. Yeah, so I'm tired with the concepts that I do not recognize myself, and at the same time I find myself in a ways you are trying to describe your space, like Anna's film or yesterday Olga's film, for example. This is something which is really close to the life, close to the reality, close to our biographies, and someone might say that this is very personal, this is very individual, but at the same time, for me, this is the only truth we have, and those concepts I find extremely artificial. For me, the Stasiuk, for me, he's not so much important for our thinking of Central Europe. It was for the, even he is not referring again to this concept. So I treat it as a kind of fashion at a certain time and nothing else. Also, I know his way of creating this world, and in my opinion, this is more artificial, his literary world, than the real space. I know the way he was choosing particular places to describe, and he was eliminating the others which were not suited to the picture. For example, he was disappointed in Rovigno, as a boring place where nothing happens, while preferring the eastern Hungary, yeah, the corner we were traveling the day before yesterday from Budapest to Uzhhorod. So this is the very individual choice. So I cannot treat it as a example of the wholeness. He also set himself on the road to Babadag because he was fantasizing about Romania as a state in a constant collapse, as a state in a somehow declared decline, this kind of things. He was unable to go to Ukraine and Belarus because while coming with this attitude to Ukraine, to Belarus, he would be this Polish, you know, with all his Polishness and the superiority of the Polish people to the east, yeah, he couldn't come to Yugoslavia, which was right after the war, with so complicated things that you cannot create his literary universe in such a circumstances. So Romania was perfect for that, yeah. So that's why I do not. That's why I do not trust into this vision. If I would choose a writer who is more trustful for me, it's Claudio Magris for sure. His way of trying to find in artifacts, in space and in texts, fragments of life, and when he also lives his life simultaneously to the writing, and also methodology of following, like in Danube, that you have some, so you know, you make a step, the next one, you are not choosing the places. When you make a step, something is changing, but still something is the same. The next step, more changes, less the same, but still you have this this state of something different and the same, familiar in one moment, and also microcosmoses. When he creates some circles, but they are somehow connected and they are very personal one. That's why if I have to say what Central European state of mind is, I'm quite close to the concept of my Slovenian friend Simona Škrabec, who described the situation as a circle with a moving center. So we are in a move, yeah, but we are the center of some circles. And I can imagine our dilemma group as this kind of multiple circles with many centers, but we are somehow connected, and this is real. I think that we are now in a stage that we have to tell the story of our part of Europe, of our region, because I'm consciously avoiding the term of Central Europe as referring immediately to Kundera. Our region, our part of the Europe, our part of the world. So we have to find completely new categories. For sure, not a country. Listing the countries is the failure at the very beginning. For example, an Angelus Prize covers also Russia. So this year's edition, they accept books from Russia. Yeah, and my colleague is the member of the jury, and she quarreled at the first jury meeting because Georgia is not involved. She's a great fan of Tam Tamelashvili's book, and she cannot offer this book to the competition, but someone is allowed to offer the Russian book to the competition. Immediately the situation changed. Yeah, so we have to find some other criteria than countries to name the region we live in. And that if I'm forced to say what's the concept of Central Europe is about, for me it's about subjectivity, not to be an object, but to be a subject. This is I think the reference to the West is quite recent, 20th century thing, but for yeah. Yeah. No, this is just a remark. If we are looking for the beginnings of the Central European concept, is not for me even Masaryk, but it is important that the line is within the Czech intellectuals. For me, it is Franciszek Palacki, his idea of Austro-Slavism. So this is the mid-19th century. And this is purely anti-imperial idea to tell to the Slavs in the Habsburg Empire that you are the main force, you are the most numerous within the empire. However, you are on the very bottom of the social and social structure and without any citizenship. So it was both against the Austrians and Germans, as well against the Hungarians, because they were acting extremely egoistically in that time, and they were playing only their own selfish game. So Palacki offered for the Slavs, let's cooperate. Yeah, but unfortunately soon Russia started to intervene into this movement. So it was anti-German and an anti-Hungarian movement, but very fastly used by Russia for their own purposes. So that's why it was a failure. And it was also a very first concept of unification, because it started from the category that someone is at the very beginning included and excluded. So the concept of Central Europe is to finding a formula that everyone is invited if wants to be the part of that. So the Slavic idea was at the beginning for Slavs, and for non-Slav it was excluded. So in the course of time we were looking for the idea which is not excluding Hungarians, Romanians, Lithuanians because of language, which is an artificial feature for the human being. It is a secondary one, I would say. So in this way well, okay, maybe too much. But you know what I meant, that we are somehow trapped in the categories, and we are looking for something broader. And I of course agree with the failure of acting as a Central European in the 90s after the collapse of communism, and this selfish acting of those 4 countries now is obvious. So the person who made me aware of this, it was Mikołaj Ryabczuk. Many years ago, he clearly said we were in such a good mood, Czechs, Poles, and Hungarians, yeah, and he spoiled this good atmosphere, saying that you have betrayed the idea of Central Europe, because the only what you've done is that you pushed out the wall eastward, yeah. So yeah, we were so proud about the achievements, and he said the only effect of this is that, are you satisfied? Are you proud of it? Yeah. And the other thing, very, very uncomfortable, he said, in fact, the only common legacy we have is the legacy of communism. Yeah. So in the circle, when we were competing, who knows more theaters built by the Viennese Bureau Helmer and Felmer, or Habsburg railway station. Yeah, he said something. The only you have in common is the legacy of communism. Now, in my opinion, this is an extremely important statement, because we are in the course of re-evaluating the second half of the 20th century. When I see the young generation, they are coming without any prejudice to the idea that after the collapse of everything at the end of the Second World War, we were trying to find some alternative model of creating a new world, and we were the only one who tried this, yeah, without all the consequences. So now we are in a situation that something new will come, and we don't know even what is this. This is, I think, worse a situation than at the end of the Second World War, because there was an alternative in socialism. Now we have not. So rethinking of the 40s is now an important task for Central Europeans. So maybe I will finish with this. Thank you.
Okay, actually, I'm not very well known in the concepts of Central Europe, so I maybe would just say something about some atmosphere in Slovakia, how I feel it. You said, you mentioned that in this time, the most important values are safety and security. And in the maybe a few years ago, it was openness, diversity. And when I was thinking about it, that it comes to me one essay which I read, and it wrote German-Korean philosopher Byung-Chun Hall, and he refers in this essay also to Roberto Esposito and his theory of immunitas. Robert Esposito, or also Byung-Chun Hall, say that the 20th century was the century of immunology, and for immunological subject is everything strange, potential enemy, and that need to be destroyed or eliminated. And he claims that the 21st century is no more the century of immunology, but I think that now we are again doing something with this subject of immunology, that in Slovakia we can maybe see it in a divided society, that one part of society or is or maybe political forces are trying to point out the importance of nation, of that what is our own, our very one of the sentence of our Minister of Culture is that the Slovak culture should be or can be only Slovak, not another. So that's maybe I read it that we have to. She said that we have to protect our own against the something strange, against the other. And maybe this is what we can see in a society, in our society. But this is in Slovakia, it's actually interesting point that this ideology is actually quite cynical, because they claim that they are representative of the nation, but actually they try to just to make profit for themselves and their people, actually. Thank you.
Sashko. I'm a historian turned military since end of March 2022. I've been serving for 4th year already. Have the rank of major of the armed forces of Ukraine. Have my own experience of war, which Andriy mentioned, that we have a variety of experiences that we will have then to gather and grasp. But my comment is kind of an inclusion of my own experience of this war, and also a reflection on the discussion that I have been part of it. Though I'm not officially invited, I'm just kind of self-invited. Thank you. And this is really a moment for me to reconnect with my, let's say, natural circles and environment. This is a good kind of remembrance of my previous life, in a way. So I would like to start with I have my own dilemmas, by the way, with my comment, because I'm a historian. I'm also analyst in my previous life, but also as a participant of the war and a Central European. So I will start with the quote from Halford John Mackinder, which was the known statement that he made during the gathering of the Imperial Geographical Society in 1904, which is known as the heartland theory. Whoever rules the Eastern Europe will rule the heartland. Whoever rules the heartland will rule the world island. And whoever rules the world island will rule the world. This is, Mackinder was the founder of geopolitics and geostrategy. And the history of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century is a reminder of the importance of this region in geopolitics and geostrategy. Basically, the two world wars were fought for this space. And the concept of East Central Europe or Central Europe comes as a response to the imperial projects for this region against Mitteleuropa, as you mentioned, and now it's Putin's external empire. What I call by external empire, we know that the Soviet Union had its internal empire, but it also created an external empire, which it ruled in a different way. So the ambitions that the current Putin's regime has basically go back to the imperial ambitions of the Soviet Union. This is because of his resentment, his grievance, his observance of the fall of the big empire while in Dresden. So this is again about the same space. What I heard today is very interesting lecture about the history of this notion, but what it was lacking for me was the reconceptualization of the notion of Central Europe in the current context. And I think we need to re-evaluate, as was mentioned before, by contextualizing the concept and by including Ukraine. Ukraine is very important, and since it's a living concept, it allows us some flexibility. So it's a kind of a mental geography. It also has political, geopolitical implications, but the main thing is to get agency. And what is, of course, we have many differences, but we have to establish also common ground between us. And currently, this is not only common history and geography, but also a common threat. And this is the fundamental change from Kundera, I mean, from the times that other novelists described this concept. So we have to understand the nature of this threat. And this is not only limited to Russia. Here I want to stress it. The Russia-Ukraine war has already global implications. And it seems that only Ukraine is fighting this war. But in fact, a war is fought against you. And you are more closer to us, so you are our strategic rear, and you are vulnerable because of this geographical proximity. And I have to know that the ambitions of Putin were actually laid down in December 2021 and repeated last year. So the goals of this war have not changed by a minimum. So this actually shows that that we are in the same boat, and we have to fight the same war, maybe with different means. So this is an opportunity for me also to give to you some good examples and also lessons learned from our war to prepare your societies for future contingencies. Because Russia has been able to create a quasi-alliance, which they have not formalized, but something that we call KRINK, yes, by the abbreviation of 4 countries which have been involved in this war. So to a different extent, they have been involved in this war. So Russia, in order to prosecute its war of attrition strategy, they need to find external assistance. So it found in the face of China, North Korea, and Iran. And they provide assistance in various forms, but with the same goal. They see this war as a starting point for building a new world order. So the nature of this threat is no lesser than the nature of the German threat in the first half of the 20th century, which led to 2 world wars. But there is another complication, which is nuclear power. And 3 out of 4 have nuclear weapons. And their arsenal is bigger than the collective nuclear arsenal of the Western world. the number of the armed forces collectively is bigger than the number of all NATO countries. 5.5 million people. They have mobilized their defense industries. They have been producing arms and weapons and ammunition. Some of them are training, they're getting new experience in this war to modernize their conventional armed forces and also to build up its nuclear forces as well. So this is a collective threat, not seen in the world since 1945. But with the inclusion of nuclear weapons, it's even bigger. So no one in Europe can survive this cannot confront alone this threat. So only together we can do it. On the fourth year of war of attrition, it's even harder to convince people to support and to be in solidarity with Ukraine. But this is exactly the point what Putin wants to achieve. He counts on your weakness of your political will. And he already shows some results. With the Trump proposal, this is for him as a sign of weakness. So, as Clausewitz once mentioned, wars are contests of wills. So this is exactly the same dilemma that we have now. We have to endure our political will, because otherwise everybody will be threatened. A fall of Ukraine, which Maxim mentioned, will not happen, which I fully agree, because of objective reasons. But if it happens, it would lead to further reshuffle of international borders, further crisis, and wars. And just to mention also to strengthen the agency of Eastern Central Europe, I want to stress that the era of Munich and Yalta is gone. Central Eastern Europe has its own agency. And it also strengthens this agency with inclusion of Ukraine, because Ukraine has the most modern experience of war fighting, of resilience, civilian resilience, democratic resilience, economic resilience, energy resilience. This is a laboratory of experience for modern warfare, for asymmetric wars, hybrid wars. So this is becomes, also a way to share our experience with you, to prepare better your societies. Because if this war is ended with a non-just, non-comprehensive, not lasting peace, this would lead just to another war. And any legalization of the occupied territories will have the same result as the Munich Diktat of 30th of September 1938. In 5 months, the Second Czechoslovak Republic was gone. Though it was promised security guarantees by Britain and France. But in 5 months, it was gone. And another 6 months, the Second World War started. So this will have the same results. So we as Central Europeans, Central Eastern Europeans, will have to defend our values and together resist neo-imperial projects which Putin tries to insert on this region. So we have to do it together, and I invite you to also to join discussions on lessons learned from this war and what we can do together. Thank you.
We just published in Croatia a great book by Sophie Oksanen, The Same River Twice, Putin War Against Women. And I just want to say that in Croatia we didn't share the experience of the Soviet Union. We had Yugoslavia, which is, it was different in various ways. So it was not what we know. We probably knew some things, but especially my generation, I'm 1990, we have no idea about a lot of things, unfortunately, and we were taught about Soviet Union very, I would say badly in school, because you only take sides as who was the winner of the Second World War, and it's all black-white, and no one tells you what Soviet Union actually was. But these kind of books, for example, this what Putin is doing, and this book has shown also, and I'm very grateful Sophie Oksanen wrote it, that this war is not only the war with weapon, it's war against really female rights and any minority rights. And I think this is also very important to undermine how misogyny was implemented in Russian society, and how much effort they are doing to undermine even every feministic movement in Europe, and how their troll farms are reacting to anything what is happening today in Europe and worldwide. And when you follow this trace to Russia, it's very scary what is truly happening, not only with this news that we follow the war, but what is happening under the surface, and how many energy is put to simply fuck any stabilization possible, any human rights that was won somewhere. So, and a lot of funding, for example, which is destabilizing democracies around the world, which can be also traced, goes from the same sources, and Russia is often part of them. So, and it's hitting always the weakness. It's not the weakness, but it's vulnerability. We are very vulnerable with human rights, even with female rights. And this is something they recognize, because they have completely devastated civil society, and now they're simply trying to push the same agenda in not only Europe, it's the same what happened in America with protests last time when there were big protests, feministic ones, and the lead followed the troll farms in Russia. So yes, this was just that comment that this threat is very, very much global and real, and maybe it's scary to think how real. For me, this farm trolls things, it was like kind of science fiction, but it's not science fiction. It is, unfortunately, our reality, yes.
Thank you very much for all your comments, observations, remarks, questions from the end. Thank you very much. You have given us the actual status quo. So it was the current state of affairs, which was the reversal side of my paper, of my lecture. I started from the history of betrayal. I was talking about the constant betrayal of the eastern and southern part of the Central Europe by the central core of the center, yes? But the idea of safety only in second decade of 21st century, so you cannot tell the story of Central Europe through this category, yes? You can start it from the last decade or for the 10 last years, and that would be all right, yes? So the war changes all, and that is all right. That is, that is correct, yes, okay. Which leads me to the brilliant idea of Korean German sociologist. He's absolutely genius, Byung-Chul Han. He wrote about this social immunology, which was, so to say, dismantled at the end of the 20th century. So it was a completely paradoxical process during which the social immunology was turned into immunology, oppression of immunology, because everything was enough interesting to accept. So openness meant that you suppress your own immunology, and the border were opened. And again, the regression of, or reactivation of immunology system is the symmetrical process of the sociology and the psychology, because it is linked to the exhausted society and the war between Russia and the war of Russia. Next stage. Well, you can say anything you want about Central Europe, but not, you can subjective matter. We are talking about the history of 2 decades, I mean the 90s and the first decade of 21st century, of literal copying the political and economical system, banking system, insurance system. So this is subjectivity. It was some kind of imposing the structural regulations from one country, Western countries, from German, the healthcare system, the banking system, the credit card system. It was imported to Poland. So this is subjectivity. No, this is, you didn't. Okay, so I overheard, well, so I heard that you called Central Europe subjectivity. Well, you cannot name this huge historical, political, economical process subjective, because we lived in it. Yes, it was a process of assimilation.
Yes, that's why it was the betrayal.
But not subjectivity. But not subjectivity. It was the process of creating the structure of life.
Misunderstanding is because you limit the idea of Central Europe to the consequences of the collapse of communism. Yeah, so the beginning is the essay of Kundera, and then we follow this path, but accepting and joining, catching up the West. To me, even if there is a literary Central Europe in the title, we should not literally read these things. We should not be into the text. We should follow rather the spirit of the text. Yeah. So the spirit of the text was anti-imperial, like all other, in my opinion, concept of Central Europe, even if it is not expressis verbis Central Europe in it. Yeah. So this Austro-Slavic idea has no any concept of Central Europe, but it was, let's do something on our own rules. Let's try to be subjective, not an object. Yeah. So I'm saying that, and I agree totally with.
Autonomy, more autonomy. Yes, not subjective.
I'm afraid to say autonomy because I'm afraid that I fit to the cliches you've drawn. Yeah, autonomy, sovereignty, integration. I'm extremely afraid. I want to have a right to name myself on my own and to live my own life. That's the definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the 90s was the failure, and that's why I mentioned Mikołaj Ryabczuk. It was someone from the outside, from Ukraine, yeah, who was not sharing this momentum, yeah, and he was saying what it is in fact, and that's why I'm on the side of Viktoras, who is saying this is the time to grow up.
Okay, whatever ideas were under the table or in the past, the idea chosen was very simple: to copy the Western models, and it was common idea, common concept of 3 countries which choose to be the representation of Central Europe. So I don't quarrel between or argue between us. Okay. Okay.
It's not a quarrel between us. I was against the concepts.
Well,
artificial.
Well, you cannot argue with the concept which.
But you can.
please, which changed the life of millions of people. Yes? This is the part of history in the 30 last years of huge part of Europe. Not only our countries, I mean Poland, Czechoslovakia and Hungary, but also the huge part of Southern Europe. Yes, they were joining the same history, repeating the same assimilating history, the same path. Yes, so this pattern proves to be the failure, and this is the moment we are awakening and posing our dramatic question. And the last thing, I do not agree with opposing, for instance, Andrzej Stasiuk and any other writer. These are two different poetics, stylistics, genres, and concepts of writing and presenting or reconceptualization of the world. What is very, very important, while we are reading Stasiuk, I don't know him so well, I'm not well acquainted with Andrzej Stasiuk, I'm not his buddy as you are. But
He's Magri's friend, his buddy,
okay.
his Magri's
Okay,
buddy.
but what is important, it is this somehow ironic plebeian perspective or semi-plebeian perspective. Of course, it is construed, it is somehow intellectual concept, but very important as a counterpart to this highly intellectual bourgeois concept of Central Europe full of monuments and beautiful cities. Yes? It was very, very important. You cannot...
The text is for sure, but I'm living in the real world. Because in the text...
No, you are not living in the real world. You are living in narratives. Okay.
But okay, my own narrative is also my life, my biography is a narrative. Maybe the problem is that I came to Pogranicze too early, and I listened there some very uncomfortable... because, you know, was Pogranicze a part of this mainstream?
Okay.
It was at the very beginning a counterculture when this word was out of fashion, yeah, because we didn't need the counterculture because everything was obvious where we are heading for, yeah? And they started to produce counterculture after the collapse of communism, yeah? Okay. Crazy.
Okay, thanks to meeting like that, nothing is obvious. Nothing is obvious, yes? Well, we deserve the break, the coffee, and so on. Thank you very much.
So, also to ask to culture people, what happened, that we can even call it cultural wars, but when we go into the concrete solutions or discussions, you know, after Yugoslav war, after probably Ukraine war, the question would be what kind of role culture could play, and there will be huge revitalization programs, you know, for, as you know, from Yugoslav and probably in Ukraine. And I'm afraid that we will do the same mistake as with Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. There will be no room for culture, or very little. We may see, but maybe one of the reasons of our gathering and talks and establishing Dilemma Academy was to initiate some ideas, some voices from this culture field to respond to this, to reality, and not to keep culture as an autonomous kingdom, which has nothing to do with issues of security, of victory, of development, and so on. Yesterday, Oksana Zabushko said how it is connected with security. Culture can be connected with security. The same is with other issues. But my point from many years is that the guilt for that, if we may call it like that, is mainly on our side, on the side of culture people, and how we understand culture practices in this world. So I will try to develop this reflection, update her, and after this today's discussion also is what could be the response for culture or of culture on the challenge for us. After this discussion about Central Europe, it was exactly behind the idea of creating Dilemma Academy what Przemek called, you know, this copying situation we had since 3 decades, that we are in position to copy the models, patterns from the West. And our understanding from the very beginning was that this is over. Yes, that we are in situation of coming back to Victoria's words, going out of kindergarten and creating our own responses, ideas, and of course invite to that as much partners as well, not pretending that we are wiser or nothing like that, but trying to be independent in thinking and creating new ideas, new platforms for exchange. And when I'm hearing from Łukasz that he's tired with idea of Central Europe and this discourse, I immediately understand that we are in circle of Central Europeans. You know, always it happens. I remember the first discussion for me in Prague in 1991, I think, when Andrzej Stasiuk was present. His first statement was, "I'm not Central European." and it's very often the case of these discussions that we pretend to be somebody else. Yeah, because not to be catch. But when Łukasz said that Central Europe for him is a fight, a struggle for subjectivity, not being object, I think what a beautiful position. You know, what a beautiful statement about Central Europe. All my struggle is also about that. Being Central European, you know, I wanted to be Central European because I wanted to have my subjective position and situation not being object by these huge narratives from other sides, and to take over our own story and build it up. When I was, and I will start with some general views to the culture, and then go to small steps and practices. You know me as a person engaged with the borderland in small community with culture work, but you know me also as a director of huge European culture programs, like being artistic director of this huge capital of Europe, culture capital of Europe projects, and my utopian ideas that I can change it, yes, from inside and make it less festival oriented and do some revolutionary or counterculture even from inside these huge culture projects we have in Europe, I would say unsuccessfully. And till yet, so there is a burden, there is a aporia, I feel, since a long time within the culture fields and the way we understand culture practices, to overcome and to fight with that from inside also. So that would be perspective more general, but also combining it with this organic work within the people as culture animator. So when I'm thinking about some general things, coming out also of our discussion yesterday and today, when I think about loneliness of Ukraine and Ukrainian people from outside, when I'm in Slovakia, in Caucasus, in United States, I'm always confronted with this narrative of peacemakers. That many people counter Ukraine, saying that, okay, they are fighters, they want to have war, and we are for peace. And this narrative is present all the time. When I only visited first time Caucasus, I've met Russian units, saying that they are peacemakers. And we have all the time politicians in Georgia, in Slovakia, in United States, in Serbia, Poland, claiming that they are peacemakers, that they say that they want peace, including Putin, yes, and Trump. Yeah? So only people who want to fight and have war, they are Ukrainians or supporters of Ukraine. And this is a kind of mindset connected with culture, which makes people in Ukraine, I think, very alone. And because they are very, very unique of trying to overcome this compromise narrative we established so well and so deeply in our minds after 1945, that we are building peace never again, and all our culture work also was for peace, but read it as not to fight and not to take weapons again in hands. So we have humanists, I was mentioning in the break, Polish philosopher, for example, a columnist of Gazeta Wyborcza, Magda Środa, when this full-scale war started in Ukraine, she was protesting to us, humanists, who started to collect money for a Ukrainian army, yes? And she was writing, how dare you finance, weapons for Ukrainians? We are humanists. Yeah? So, and this is not an exception, yeah, unfortunately. So, when I was in, during the wars in former Yugoslavia, one thing I can mention to you out of that is that there was no word victory in the vocabulary of this war. Nobody was victorious and nobody was fighting for victory. And after Dayton, nobody felt like victorious. So there was, the victory was like erased from the vocabulary, yes, we're using. The first people who brought it back to the global vocabulary were Ukrainians. They put at stake, fight for the victory. And I think it has a major cultural consequences. Because what it was, it was for the decades, we humanist culture people and so on, we were struggling to be on the right side of the things. Liberal, human rights, peaceful, pacifistic, and so on and so on. To be on the right side, it doesn't mean that we are a winner on this right side. Never, in fact. But at least we were heroes of being on the right side. And even being defeated, always being defeated. We were heroes. And we were heroes in the way like, that's something what Ivan Cholovich, explained me very clearly about the myth of Kosovo. For Serbian people, also others, you know, that you were defeated in Kosovo Pole, on the earth ground, here in this world around us, but we are winners in the heaven. So the case is not to be winner, victorious here and now, because it never will happen, but we should be the winners, you know, these righteous people which will win in the heaven. When Amos Oz, I came back to this book now, but he was writing this book. It is a non-fiction book he wrote about Israel in the beginning of 80s. At least it was published at that time. He was traveling from one town to another in Israel, talking with people and writing down these stories, you know, what was the lesson of Second World War and Holocaust to them. And at the end of the book, he shows that Israeli people had two big icons in the imaginary, in the mindset. The first was an icon of Hitler, and I think it is in connection with what Arsene was saying, what will happen if evil power will win. So you start to believe that that's something how things are happening on this world, you know, that these powerful, cynic, evil people are winners. So that's a necessity or something like eternal, you know, powers. Timothy Snyder was writing about that in context of Russia, you know, this belief that it is eternal defeat of people being on the right side. Yes, eternality was something what is keeping people like Putin in power all the times, because there is no change to that. So the same was writing Amos Oz about, you know, having Hitler like the power of the earth, you know, the power of how it happens among us here. And the second image, guess what it was? Messiah. So that, again, yeah, here what we can do, probably nothing, but in the heaven we will be saved by Messiah, some other power which is not in our hands. We are not responsible for that. That there will be external power, you know, to solve our things and so on. And this Messiah icon is coming back. I don't know if you are aware that there is ideology under Trump power in America and Israel power as well. This ideology is about bringing sooner Messiah on the earth. Yes, you have this evangelistic church idea of Armageddon. I'm saying it, but this is not a sect. It's 40 million Americans belong to this church. Acceleration. Exactly. And when you remember during the first presidency, Trump moved the embassy of US from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it was exactly the moment he became a hero for all these Armageddon kind of people. Yes? What it means that you should do evil here, you should make more war, more suffering. Because of that, Messiah will come sooner. And of course, if he will come, he will save us. Yes, that's a belief. Yeah. Yes. No, of course.
Radical.
Of course.
The last change.
Yeah. So all this is kind of mindset which is so deeply present among us that the question is, when you are asking what is the way out of these dark times, we should also confront this. Yes, how to prove that people like Hitler or Putin are not overwhelmingly, you know, ruling this world only, like no alternative solution to that. And what is with these transcendental values? Does it make us less responsibility for our here and now existence and having responsibility for that. Because if you don't believe that you can change, can make any change around you with your own powers, with powers of the people, then you give the power to the messengers of eternity, yeah, the ruler, dictatorship around us. Saying all that, the frustrating thing is that you have this analysis, you have these lessons, and they are repeating all the time, and they have new fuel, new ideologies, new political powers coming to rule it. And what I was saying during this discussion about our neighborhood, about pop culture, it's part also of that. Yes, that when we agree that being in touch with other people, with people in the provinces, with people in small towns, people with different professions, not only professional, cultural people, intellectual, and so on. If we will start to believe that they need another kind of culture than we, because they are just people, and they need pop culture, then a big danger happens. Again, because it's like a withdrawal and disrespect. In fact, the way I understand is disrespect to the people, although you pretend to tell it in the name of the people. Yes, we want to be closer to you, so we resign from ambitious, deep narratives and ideas because we want to be closer. And of course, we politicians buying you like that. But what about us? Yes, should we have the same resignation and disrespect people in that way? Is that they need, some other people need another kind of culture than we have. And of course, one of the reasons for that, and this is another point I'm still working all the time to bring it to our discussion, is the power of big numbers, which we are enslaved by. And one of another presence of this distraction powers among us, that if we will start to believe that small is irrelevant, there is no possibility to change the world by small numbers, intimate actions, small steps, direct with people, long-term, organic, and only big numbers, big events, big media things can do it, then we have another problem with these powers, that somehow we started to believe that only Goliath can defeat another Goliath. And we lost this belief, trust in David's power, in fact, in culture. And it comes together with the market, with some media world, and the situation of our small borderland center, to give you just one example, is that very often journalists are coming to us, but privately, not having delegations from the editorial teams and so on, and they're saying, we wanted to come to you, but you should know that we are not supported by our bosses with that. And there are two reasons for that. The first is ideological. When Kaczynski party, went to the power, they were afraid to write about borderland activities and so on. But second is even more danger. You are too small. You are too small to gain attention, to be in the media world and so on. Paradoxically, my experience, my generation experience, every case I know which changed the world is a small one. I don't know the case of big number which is changing the world. So it's another paradox on that, because when you are deciding, that that your activities should invest in something what is small, it means uncommercial, it means long term, it means together with people, and so on and so on, respecting time together, not only event time and so on. If you build on that, then the logic of your community work, of your human relationships with others, with powers of the world, are completely different. That you can be trustful and honest with all these things when only you go, lift to the bigger numbers, bigger scopes, and so on. Different kind of powers start to overcome all this, and there was a kind of wisdom, in this. We have this solidarity movement, and we have this committee for workers' defense. There were few people. I mentioned Cultura magazine and changing all this. There were few people. Yeah, there was, this concept of Walden, as this narrative started with Thoreau, which was so important for our culture, countercultural movement in the 60s. It was based on a very intimate small community experience, developing some ideas. What was interesting in that was that we took it, many people from counterculture at that time took it as granted that it is enough to escape from the people and establish your own commune, yes, somewhere in the nature, which ended up very wrongly, yes, because it became very soon a kind of dystopian, autocratic small communities with gurus and so on and so on. So our intuition in 1989 was rather to go to the people than escape, to run out of communities and to locate your dreams, your cultural ambitions among local community and do it together with people in co-creative way. And I'm telling about this because when, for example, Przemek was writing afterward to my book, Small Center of the World, he shifted my attention also. I didn't saw it so precisely as he is writing about that all our efforts at the beginning of transformation was to find a new model of community life, the new model of coexistence with others, after the former models were destroyed and ineffective anymore. And I think this is one of the most important challenges for culture, for us today, to work on the new patterns of coexistence, of building, because one of the biggest crises we face now is the crisis of coexistence, of living together in the way which will be satisfactory and holistic for our needs and fulfilling. So do we have answers? This is something what I would put to our table. Do we have answers for this need of building new ways of communicating, building togetherness and coexistence with others? that's when I'm saying saying that I feel this need for new counterculture. It's exactly the need of also practicing, searching for new patterns of communal life. And as you know, I'm at the same time practitioner of ideas, and when you are coming to Krasnogruda and Sejny, at least you can see our efforts to build a kind of alternative, yes, in practice of this community life, and work to try to put it into practice. So out of that comes this concept of small center of the world as an answer to these needs, that we should think about our cultural activities as building small centers of the world. It means, in short, that the place we are living in, with all this environment, could be the place where we can do the most important thing in the world. Opening up this place and center to the world issue, to the empathy, solidarity with others, opening it up to being yourself, to knowing and being rooted in that place, together with other people, and at least to take responsibility for something what we can be responsible for. The idea of Central Europe, for me, one of the reasons I was so much for it was that after 1989, there was very difficult to stay in your place where you are living, because it was so full of empty memory gaps, bad memories, traumas, conflicts with neighbors. So much easier at that time was to become a European, feeling that I'm just European, than Central European, because Central European means that I have to deal with my neighbors. I have to deal with these traumas. I have to take responsibility what is around me. Don't escape from that. My feeling after 1989, and one of the reasons we marginalized the idea of Central Europe, was that we were escaping from ourselves to Europe, to global, to universe. But it was, leaving behind unsolved problems, which will come back. And in my essay, which I wrote because it is in the title 1994, How to Be Yourself, I was somehow foreseeing that if we will escape from Central Europe, we will, in the next step, we will escape from Europe. Yes, that's this escape Przemek was saying about being against European integration and so on, for me is a consequence of escaping from being Central European, solving our own issues and problems with our neighbors and in our environment here. So it is much difficult, to be, in fact, in that way. So for me, in saying it was much difficult to be Central European, so to know Baranauskas, to know the story of the Holocaust, all these things which are not in the textbooks at school. Because in the textbook I have Goethe, I have Dante, I have, French Revolution. Okay, yes, but does it concern, our Polish-Lithuanian relationships? Or, some local writers and so on and so on? Not, yeah? So nothing, as you see, there is nothing about idealizing Central Europe, it's only making us working on our courtyard, yes, our yard, and doing this work, but not in the way to be close and to say that we say in Polish, nasza chata z kraja, so we prefer to be provincialized and don't think about the world issues, because we are, local community lovers and don't care about anything else. We are the best, the wiser, the most beautiful. Not at all. Yeah, that's that's a way of opening up, not beyond, you know, the heads of people around you, but taking it as a kind of work of cultivation we should develop. So that's how we develop this concept of small center of the world, which maybe can change our culture policy, you know, all over the world, because we share the same problems and the same mistakes. If you are a grant giver, if you are working in Ministry of Culture or any business politician wanting to support culture, the first thing is, okay, let's do festival. Yes? No problem. But to find support, trust, understanding, that most important things are what happens after festival, the day after, we are staying, you know, with our problems, with peoples, with neighbors, and who will do it? Yeah, artists disappear. You know, we are here and now they help us with ideas. We had some beautiful stories, wonderful cinemas moving us, but let's do something with that. And if you want to do something, then next day we should start the work. It's on that. And then support disappears. There are no money in business. There are no money in policymakers, you know, to support it. When we received, you know, it was this kind of strange adventure we have, that we received this European Culture Prize of Prince Margaret in Amsterdam. And we came with these ideas of small center of the world, with small town from Spain. There were people from Rijksmuseum, Museum, you know, for these biggest festivals in Europe. What is your place around this table? You know, you guys from this small scene. But there was awareness of, we didn't know any member of the jury, but we suddenly realized that they are feeling that this is a new need in Europe, you know, of making a culture in different way, as a counterculture to this festivity, to these event-oriented things. Because it is not a problem that we don't have money for culture. There's a huge spending. When being this artistic director for Culture Capital, I had milliards of money. The question was how we will invest it. If we are going to invest it, it's something what will prevail and build, you know, the change, or we will use it, you know, like fireworks, and then after the festivity there are some ruins, you know, of, we call it, you know, white elephants. You build institutions, you know, sports, culture, sports, and after the festival there is no money for sustain, you know, sustainability of that. So we receive many white elephants, you know, this, that you give a gift, you know, to somebody, but you should food it, yes. You should food this elephant, yes, after, for many years, yes. That's how very often it works in culture. So one of my answers is, let's think about small centers of the world. And to be clear, it doesn't mean that it should be a small town or anything like that. It could be a district in the town, you know, neighborhoods, you know, different things, location. But it means that we invest cultivare, this kind of work for long term with people, environment, nature, you know, from that place, and doing it in a way like avant-garde culture, yes. It's another thing, you know, very interesting when you are coming to Krasnogruda, to our international dialogue center. You see this revitalized manor house of Czesław Miłosz family, but it is painted, the porch is painted in red, yes. And the specialists of cultural heritage are saying to us, listen, it's heresy, you know, never manor house looked like that. And they are coming from Warsaw, you know, from Brussels, from these heritage organizations, and they want us in province to be like 100 years ago it was. Yes, be like that. Keep this heritage. It means that you are guardian of heritage, but you don't have right to be avant-garde, to break rules, yes, to create new things, to invent. So this is another perception to something what we may call, once in Poland we developed in 90s the movement we called small homelands movement. And there was special budget for that in TV and Ministry of Culture to help people in small provinces to develop culture. But the way it was done was that we know in the center, we know in TV programs, we know in Warsaw Ministry what you should do, how it should look. Never red color porch. Yeah, it should look like, you know, this on that. So there is no way for you coming from a small town or some to be innovative. Yes, to be in that way. This kind of soft imperialism is always present also from the in European Union. You know, in the center of Brussels, when they started to offer to Central European countries this money for development, there was very few for culture. So they were very eager, and it was a big mistake of our elites. You know, they were eager to build roads and invest, you know, everything what can serve also them, but they were happy if we would not pretend to spend much money in education and culture. That was how they projected also this European province. They should have better roads. They should have better hotel structures, and no problem, we can help and give you money for that. But to build an innovative cultural institutions, laboratories, and so on. And of course, the clerks from Brussels were not guilty because our elite, you know, decided, you know, mostly, you know, how this money would spend. But very little part of that support came to the culture and education development. So that's also about emancipatory strategy, you know, how you can use small centers of the world to be emancipated, you know, from that imperialistic strategies, you know, even if they are very, very soft sometimes. And the last point I want to make before giving you the voice is about narrative. We also spoke about that in short. This is mostly the topic of my book, Toward Xenopolis. But in short, I would say that since 200-300 years, we were living under the domination of two major narratives. One was cosmopolitanism, that in short, I will of course generalize, but we build a modern world. We got out of the provinces to big industrial centers. We cut off our relationships with our roots. And that's the way, and that's the cost, necessary cost to build a modern world. Become a citizen of the world, to change life, and to leave behind us all these burdens, you know, with memories, with heritage, with neighbors, with everything. It was so, you know, with this feeling of freedom that we are coming to big cities, new metropolis, building modern world, and becoming beautiful idea, you know, citizens of the world. And the second very strong narrative, nationalism, that, you know, apologetic to our roots, to our belongings, to our national identity, and so on and so on. And even if at the beginning, during the Spring of Nations in 19th century, it was a positive and emancipatory movement. Yeah? There is a book by Brian what is the name, Brian, the Hungarian-American historian. We published a book under the title Since Nationalism Started to Hate. Przemku, pamiętasz? Brian, odkąd nacjonalizm zaczął nienawidzieć. Brian, yeah. There was a moment when this emancipatory movement became kind of ideology full of hatredness against neighbors, xenophobic ideas, and so on and so on. Brian Porter, sure, thank you. So, in short, my question and my diagnosis of our time is that these two narratives are over, that they are not anymore response to our needs of people belonging to the 21st century. Of course, they are still remain as powerful, but we more and more feel that they don't bring us answers to our deepest needs, either nationalism and cosmopolitanism as well. So my question would be, what could be the third, the new narrative we can develop after leaving these ideologies, narratives behind us? And in short, this concept of xenopolis is the concept of, at least, of course there is something utopian in it, believing that we can have a polis with the stranger, xenos, at the heart of it. So it tells us that there is no community without the stranger. It's not even the question about could we be hospitable for the strangers and others, of course, but it is to understand that we will not live together and coexist well without strangers, without others. And at the same time, it tries to bridge roots with openness. That was my lesson from the borderland. The lesson was that if you cut off people from the roots, that they are not fully belong to the oikos, as Greeks would say, they are not becoming open and citizens of the world. They are becoming deeply nationalistic and xenophobic. So the case of strongest nationalists were done by the people who were cut off from the roots. They were not fully inhabited the whole environment they belonged to. Yes, that there was something, false and based on lies, with the belongings, erasing something, hiding something, not belonging to that, and that's how you became this neophytic nationalist, yes? Because the full belongings, which is probably ideal, yes, but at least you can be on the way to that, opens you up, yeah? Opens the world, yes, and makes it much more hospitable for others than. So I would think about this form of cultures when we can connect belongings and working, on being in stronger ties with people and places. We are living it with openness, with solidarity with others, with empathic attitude to the others, to understand, to take out this weapon from mostly nationalistic politicians. Yes, they are saying that they care about our belongings, that they care about, which is not true. Yes, that they care about our safety, that they care about our uniqueness and so on. No, homogeneity never works for for well-being, yes, in any case. So, of course, it is just in question, but at least my feeling is that we are on the threshold of searching new narrative after these two domain narratives of the past time. So, thank you.
Who would like to start? So there is no option like this. What do you want to hear from me? No, I'm Joe. Well, comments. Yeah, I can comment until tomorrow. I don't even know where to start to. But yeah, like I don't want to sound like a groupie, but I'm following the Krzysztof's work since I was a teenager. He didn't know me then, but I knew him. I was sitting in that Center for Cultural Decontamination. And the first book I bought in Poland was like Neighbors. And it somehow put a stamp on me personally, on everything that I was interested in. And since today, like I think I'm on that path. And today I'm here on Dilemma. So like, it couldn't be more perfect. Well, I would just start with that kind of activism. You know, like it's one of the like it's rooted, at least from my like Serbian or Yugoslav perspective. Since like during 90s, I was like a small girl. I'm 45 now, so yeah. When the war in Yugoslavia started, I was about 12. But still, like, that was the most popular word, like activism, anti-war activism. And there was also mentioned the word betrayal. And you know, like from my perspective today, I can feel that activists from that period, and you know them all by names, like my generation, because we also wanted to be active at that time. They were so, like, their approach was so elite, you know. They didn't speak to common people. They were speaking among themselves. They were discussing, talking about, like, of course, they are anti-war, you know, and they were going between Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, and they talked among themselves. They didn't have to persuade, you know, people who are on the same page. They failed to educate people around them and to educate next generations who would like continue that job. And that's what I think, like that's when culture failed, you know, because before Yugoslavia collapsed, of course then movements started to like the first issue was the language, which is like one language. And then they started to persuade us that we actually don't understand each other. We don't speak the same language. And it's all, until today, it's all about like reinventing those nations through the culture. For example, like Serbian language, we have two letters, two alphabets, Cyrillic and Latin. And since we have the regime that we have, like culture doesn't exist. It's not the topic. So they cut all the fundings, everything, like it doesn't exist. The only project that you can apply to is like, okay, you will get some kind of money if you publish the book in Cyrillic, because Cyrillic is dying. And then like it's so artificial, you know, like for me, I will read something and ask me 10 seconds later, I cannot tell you whether I read that in Cyrillic or Latin. And then they just trying to put into your mind some stupid things about like, that means anything, you know. So those kind of stuff happen till today, which is pretty much sad. And still, for like 30 years or more, you have like two layers of existence. You have like parallel reality in that region, like official narration, but the things happen, like the culture exists, and it's pretty much mixed, and it consists of all those republics all together. They're doing great stuff, and they communicate. So that kind of like normal communication exists, I would say, pretty much normal. But it's never normalized on a like official level, which is strange. Like you live in some kind of parallel reality, but my reality is not the same as the reality from someone who lives, I don't know, maybe in different context. So, but still, like when you find yourself, like at least my biography is like that. Like I used to study in Poland. I traveled all around the world. I've never been to Georgia or Armenia. But every time I meet those people, I feel among brothers and sisters. Like we speak the same language, even though the context is totally different. But the same thing actually happens in Georgia and in Serbia right now. It's like, it's so similar, you know, like, and actually we follow. That's the only information in media that matters, you know? About like Ukrainian being feeling abandoned and alone. Like you mentioned, Andriy, at the beginning, like what else should we do, like for you, in order to like for you to do something like together with us, not for us, but together with us. That's the feeling that will, unfortunately, at least from my experience, it will stay for long, you know, and my feeling is that you just have to lower your expectations, you know, because at the beginning, you know, like there were always like big words, big willingness, but at the end, nothing actually happens, you know, and that's the feeling that stays for a long time. This is how we feel. Like we try, at least in Serbia, we try to fight that regime now. Like students have that great movement, and they are doing actually the thing that I'm accusing people, activists, NGOs from 90s. They didn't do that. They go from one village to another and talk to uneducated people. They just walk. They're marching. They are like walking. And they enter their houses, you know, because like society is very sensitive to children. They all call them children. Our children are doing, and I'm pretty angry. They're not children. Like they are young, they are adults, you know. They have like right to vote, and they have they are educated. They are like adult people. But still, like, and that's very good, you know, because they don't have access to independent medias. Those people they're good, like nice people, but they just don't understand what's going on. And they go and they talk to them, you know, and this is the only way that you can change something. I work for like Polish Institute in Belgrade, which is established a year and a half ago. And our strategy from the beginning, like together with my excellent director, Lech Konchak, who was doing the same in Tbilisi for like almost 8 years. We just changed the paradigm of how those institutions function. You know, it's not that you are coming like, because we had that experience, people from EU were coming and like trying to tell us how to do the things from their perspective, from their context, without even slight knowledge of local context. And of course, that conception failed. It couldn't give us anything because it was, sorry, but stupid, nothing else. And now, like, when you change that and when you start to do, like, partnership, when you start to, like, communicate, like, and to start kind of dialogue and cooperation, amazing things happen. And I think that everyone from us, whatever we do, we are here like, I don't know, professors, translators, writers, activists, politologists, like This is the only thing that we can do. Like whatever we do, we have to have some kind of like activism in that. Try to fight the prejudice of one person, and I don't know, I consider that a small win. If I, as a Serbian, go and talk to Polish journalist in Gdańsk a couple of months ago, who has no knowledge whatsoever of what's going on, and we sit in the cafe, and I don't know, maybe he likes me, he wants to listen to me, and I like explain something, or at least try to familiarize him with something, and he said, now I have a totally different perspective, like I will try to know more. I think it's a small victory for me. And that's the like activism how I see it. And about Central Europe, like it's also like from our perspective, it's also kind of problematic, you know, because like when Poles are saying Central Europe, Central Eastern Europe, we are that eastern part, you know, and for us, Poland is kind of eastern part of Europe. You know what I mean? I mean, you know exactly what I mean. Especially like, maybe not my generation, but my parents' generation. They still, they don't have a clue what's going on. They will say Czechoslovakia and Soviet Union. Me. Yeah, Yugoslavia, something like that. Yeah, that's, yeah. And Serbia is Siberia when you're west. Yeah, it's all about context, you know, my favorite word. Yeah, Poland, Holland, Serbia, Siberia, yeah, that's it. So like, I think the biggest problem and the biggest like cause of crisis, not only in culture, but in this world is wide ignorance. And we have to fight that ignorance. First, our ignorance, and then try to like work on educating people. Thank you.
Sorry, Krzysztof, I had a call from my mother and my children. That was urgent, so I missed your conclusion. I can think of what conclusion was. You were somewhere in Xenopolis, so probably you ended up in Utopia. But, well, I will now, I will put now things more, Croatia comes after Serbia. I think that what is happening now in Balkans is very strange position because Croatia is in European Union, but we have so many problems. Now, for example, we have this elections for mayors, and so it's local elections, and it has showed us that we are nothing better than the rest of the Balkans. And we were like highly thinking of ourselves, we are civilized, we are not, we are mobsters. It's like very strange to look at this kind of populistic agenda and how real mobsters are coming down from the 19th period and resurrected now to make scandals, like to fabricate them, just to win Zagreb, yes. I don't think, this is the other thing, you know, Central Europe is something, I don't know how is it in Serbia, but in Croatia, new generations, we don't even perceive West as a West or East as a East. Nothing out of this concept is still alive. So we don't even bother with the idea of the Central Europe too. So the thing is that when we think of it now for the new generations, and I'm not that young, even though they tell me I'm the youngest. I'm 35, so I was 1990 when the war started. I was born a bit before that. So yes, Tito and war, we have both. So these are the dots, you know, connect Balkans with these dots. But the thing is that Central Europe is not in this what it was important for people especially educated, probably rich people who could afford education and also afford to write long books and think of Central Europe. That's not what it's important anymore, at least for this new generation. And then, I mean, I deeply feel as Central European, and I think that we should, you know, make out of it a new idea that can help us cope with the aggression of Russia and all the other dangers that are coming. As I said, Russia doesn't have only wanting, it's not only wanting to only take over some part of region, it's really changing mindsets of the world, you know, and when all our things that we fought for coming from human rights and so on are in this kind of danger. It's not only danger in Central Europe, it's really danger even in America, you know, especially now with Trump. But to go back from Central Europe to culture, so I have this position that is very, very strange, even in Croatia, because I'm not from the background usually people in writing are. Basically, my family was in, you know, they were village people. Both of my parents never had even high school. My mother came from Bosnia to work with when she was 14, and then she later on married my father. We were refugees for 10 years during the war. My village went to some kind of very hard massacre during the war too, because I'm in this area that is very, it was during the war very, it is not heterogenic, you know, it's ethnic Serbs and Croatian, so it was the first line also with the east of the Croatia. So, and most of my life I had no books in my house, like until I was, I don't know, 20, I suppose. And even my education or start of education, because I never finished college because I couldn't afford it. In the end, I lost that battle with working too much. I studied physics. So I'm a complete stranger in cultures, even in Croatia. And I think this is a good point, because I don't belong anywhere in any circles, and I have kind of much more different perspective on things. For example, I'm very connected to my community back in this region of Banja, my hometown, that also went through a very hard earthquake a few years ago. That was the second devastation after the war, so we never recovered after the war. And then the earthquake hit, and this made people even simply, you know, lose the homes. They barely rebuilt. And some of the homes are still not, you know, built after all this 4 years now. And there is a reason for that, because there is still a mixed, you know, people living there. And unfortunately, mostly because we did during the war this ethnic cleansing also of the Serbs, especially in this area. And we mistreated this area so badly because we wanted for people to go out. So when we talk about culture, we really have to talk about what was happening in some parts of areas in the history. But yes, this perspective is for me something much, I think, different that most of the people has in culture, because it makes me see the problems, you know, more accurate. And I think that we cannot talk about culture, as you said, if we talk in these terms of snobism and elitism, because I love my neighbor also, you know, as much as even more than I don't talk that much to people in culture, because they're mainly snobs and elitists. But I can talk to you also, you know, and he's a wonderful man, and I'm making a movie now about him. And I think that coming back to that kind of roots is very important, and not to think that people who do not have education cannot understand you. This is also very, very important thing. And then when you come from this, as I said, I never finished college, and we still have this huge gap, and I think it's even bigger in capitalism that people from poor families don't get a chance to become something. So if culture is reproducing cultural people, so if directors are reproducing directors, writers are reproducing writers, what stories can they tell? It's like, you know, incest in terms of cultural production of anything. So I think then we truly lack fresh new voices. In creation, you know, what would be cultural landscape, I know all the people who are from the different backgrounds. This is how many of us there is, you know, that we're not having rich, either educated, influential families, you know, and only few cases that manage to do something in the culture. And this is a very huge problem, and I think it's not only creation problem, I think it's problem, an even bigger problem everywhere. So can we even talk about culture if we don't think how to empower those who cannot access culture? And when we go to villages, when we go to places that cannot have access even to books, not to mention theater or movies. But my hometown doesn't have a theater. Yes, it doesn't have a theater. No, it doesn't have even a cinema. So, you know, you should go to another city that is, I don't know, 40 minutes away to, maybe there is a cinema. I don't know, is it working in Sisak, you know? So it's like, you know, it's like entire region is left out of cultural things, and some of them are in Sisak. So I think that the very important question is, how do you see the next one, the next great talent that is hidden somewhere there and doesn't have means to educate himself, doesn't have way to make something, and it could, you know, and it could bring something new, some new voices, because I think culture cannot do anything without new voices. And this is something that we continue not to talk about, but there is the simplest reason for that, and this is because mainly people in the room are not from that background, so they don't bother, you know, and it's okay, but you know, to understand how culture should work and why it should be always fresh. I mean, fresh eyes can see problems better than the old ones that were always looking at the same point. So I think this is something that is necessary when we do cultural work, at least to go somewhere, you know, to show something different. We started to do this kind of workshops. We do a lot of them in this region of mine. But we also started to do them in foster homes in Zagreb. And I was talking to my friend, she's working with little children in this home with children without parents. And we were discussing, good God, does this even make sense? You know, they're so out of their mind that it's very hard to work with them. And it's very stressful and it's very, you know, taking out energy. But then she told me, Monica, you know what happened the other day? So she wasn't like there for 2 or 3 weeks because her children were sick. And then she told me the little girl came and she asked her, can she read that book she read them first time she came, which was 6 months ago. So she remembered that well the book that she read and this is something that shows you that it matters. So if this girl can remember something like that and express a wish to hear, and it probably will matter more to her than it matters to my children that listen to stories every night. So I think this is a huge, huge question. But okay, and this is a little bit of effort, but the bigger effort should be how to make education to these children accessible. I have seen so many talents and I have no way to help them because I cannot fund their education, which is a huge problem. Maybe even not persuade their parents that they can do more. And you're stuck because you look at these children and you see what they can do and you have no way to help them. Not even in this, you can, yes, apply them for some scholarship, but most of them don't have good grades because they never were expected to go somewhere, you know. So they would continue to work with their family in the field. Parents would tell them, you know, just finish this. You know, it's a different kind of setting, even thinking about education. So it's very, because they, in my village, and it was the same in my case, people don't think to educate children because they don't have money to educate them. They only want them to finish at least some school so they can start to work. This is completely different case from probably most of the experience, and it's the same thing even now. So I think this is something that we have to start to talk about. And this is part of this story about small centers of the world. If we could think of culture that goes to every small center, then this culture should care about who has the talent and what can it show to everyone and what can it give so this talent can be developed. The other thing I think that we have to stop doing is this, what I have mentioned before, is this snobism and elitism. I know a lot of families and a lot of people, you know, because I'm not obviously a snob, and I talk with them, you know, from various situations. A lot of times I hear this sentence that they are afraid to go somewhere to hear something because they will not understand it. So we even made them feel this even before they could come to the theater, before they could come to, I don't know, talk about the book, before they could come. So they live with this prejudice they were given by us, cultural people. They will not understand. And so they are afraid to go there. And it's the same thing with children, you know. I talk to, you know, little friends of my daughters in school and from my son, and I'm like, let's go to read at my place. And they're like I have said that I will put them in needles, you know. And I'm like, what? And I see the confusion, so I understand. They don't read at home, and then they have to kind of make this statement, I don't like reading. I'm like, you don't, but do you read? So, okay, I don't have to, I don't even ask, do you read? I'm like, no, it's okay, but we can try, you know? And then we try, and the next time what happens is they ask me all the time, Monica, when will we go now to read at your place? It's crazy, you know, and this is, when people say they don't love something, that probably means they're scared, that they don't understand it. And this is something we don't understand a lot of times. When you work with children, for example, in some other schools, except from gymnasium or something like that, a lot of those children from economical school, from Trgovac, what is, yes, then you also talk with children, you know, that are aware how they're looked at, like their value is less. And you ask them, why don't you go to theater? And they also give you the same information. Like, but maybe we are not for the theater. Like someone told them they are not for the theater, or for the books, or for anything. So this is something that we made. And this is also, why did we make it? Because we have this incest in the culture, because cultural people were producing cultural people. So of course, if someone has in line 3 generations of directors, that he is looking at everyone else like something that is not worth of looking at. That is a huge, huge problem. Culture cannot change anything without changing this point of view. And then we can come, just connect to the other thing. And this is who can make this kind of question now, because I think that even though we can, you know, say like parrots, capitalism, 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 when it comes to real life, this is a huge problem. Because even in this movie we were watching, it was a beautiful thing when the director told about her father, how he was working daily job and then he was painting at night. The thing is, today, no one can afford to work one job. We have another problem, you know. For example, I would love to find the time to write, but the thing is that even not only one full-time job can help you to afford your art. So this is like the second problem that we never discuss when we talk about how to make a great culture, how to make the deep culture. Deep culture, it is the only solution, but the problem is deep culture needs time. And we are in instant, you know, in instant moment of history in which we have to overwork ourselves and we are expected not to go deep. So how to fight that when you fight barely for your sleep? I think it's quite, you know, important question. It's quite, you know, question that is simple for that. I mean, I see some people in culture in Croatia, they have means because their family, you know, has one apartment that were given to them. They had another two, so they can rent that. So that pays entirely their living. And I'm okay with that. But they do not produce important anything, and that is the problem. And some people who had voice or could have voice and could produce important movies, books, if they were only given time to do it, cannot do it because they are choking with working too much. And so we are again in some kind of loop in which this is something I don't know how to work with yet. Maybe if I figure out, I will let you know. But and we cannot. But really, the deep culture, yes, I really think that we are in such time. I have, for example, noticed, which scared me, that since we have so many information daily, I work as an editor, and very often, and I read a lot. You know, I have a lot of books to edit. I read a lot by that. But what do I remember? At some point, I realized that I remember very little because my delete in this enter, delete is so fast that nothing stays. So if I want to focus and make it like stay permanently in my head, I really have to, you know, write down, come back to it. So I have to come up with totally, you know, slow strategy with the text that I want to stay with. Because otherwise, everything is just on this very fast track of deleted, because new entry will come soon. So I think that rethinking very slowly everything is the answer. But the other really important answer is in this time, how to afford that time. And I think this is, yes, to you know, answer individually, but I think that we need to think of how to make this possible and how to fight capitalism with this, yes, slowness, but at the same time not to, you know, hunger, make ourselves hungry as well as our children, you know. And there is another, the last thing I promise, and this is what we were talking about. Someone did mention it before. It's the matter of truth and how the truth matters, especially today, when something, when everything can be, you know, perceived as truth, because we all live in this time in which everything can be manipulated, I suppose. And so I think that the question of truth is also the question of culture. And I have to say that I think that anyone who is dealing with art should never and cannot be silent. And this is something I deeply believe in. I think that if you compromise with silence, you cannot do art. It doesn't work together. And it's easier to compromise, you know, it really is. It's easier not to get somewhere and expose yourself. But I think also that as someone who wants to make a change, and I think culture does make change, if we can overcome all of this, what I have mentioned, then we must not stay silent. We have a huge problem in I would say, of course, in the world, but I can see my own, you know, place, my own home. Artists in Croatia are pretending also, I mean, they were a bit maybe louder about Ukraine, a bit, but not that much. It's also like it doesn't exist in this way. But as far as it goes with Gaza, I think that only few of us said anything, only few. And there is tens of, hundreds of, you know, artists in various fields. And as long as we pretend that it's not our business, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, you know, are we talking about female rights, women's rights, or are we talking about pedophilia in church? Are we talking about, you know, genocides? Everything is important because it's the truth, and this is something that we also have to deal with, not to compromise and not to be conformists. I think where there is conformism, it's hard to find change, and that means also it's hard to find good art. I will finish.
Really?
And now I continue with the second one. Now for the optimistic point of view.
Okay, Monica, this is for you because you skipped the conclusion. There was no conclusion, there was open question, actually. And yes, Krzysztof was telling in the end of his talk, two extremes, cosmopolitans and nationalism, and these narratives are going, and what should we bring? There is something which is working, regionalism, and all the conversation here about Central European identity is about regional identity in a way. So I think lessons are learned, though we don't have our Kundera to write the tragedy of South Caucasus. But in historical perspective, I see that for our region, yes, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan together, we can build something and then knock the doors or just stay all together, three of us. There are obstacles. Oil in Azerbaijan, which will end in 50 years, I suppose. There are some people telling that 50, 70 years, and that's the end of oil world. So yeah, regionalism. I myself think about also small centrism, but we should evaluate the ideology and everything. But small centrism also sounds good for me, and I will keep it short because everybody's tired, and Claudio took it really serious. He did a lot of notes, so I will give the floor to you.
Monica, I am not the fruit of an incest, so I'm happy that we can continue this dialogue. Yeah, I come from a country that probably bears some of the same problems and complexes as the cultures in your countries. We've realized recently that with the recent presidential elections, and not only that, it started to become obviously in 2020, during the pandemics, that there are two Romanias, in fact. A pre-modern Romania and a cosmopolite, urban, you know, people who will consider themselves Europeans and citizens of the world. Now, I was asking myself, am I Central European? Because I was raised and I was always conscious of myself as an Eastern European. Romania has a certain divide because Transylvania is historically was for half a millennia in the Habsburg and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the easternmost part of the Central Europe. I'm from the southern Romania, from Wallachia, which had interesting and long-term ties with Turkey. So all kinds of divides in my country, in my culture. I would be interested if you want to continue, because everything I did in these last 15 years is in that sense, and I was very happy that you said that, not to keep culture as an autonomous kingdom. And almost everything I've done was not against, but in spite of the establishment. Because in Romania, the policies and the institutions and the elites, then the politicians, the Ministry of Culture and all that is not functional. So my generation, more than the generation of the 90s, had to invent its tools, its institutions, small centers of the world in which we could do meaningful, I hope, meaningful things. But is it the same in your countries with this chaotic, bureaucratic architecture that makes it very difficult to, that's inefficient and not quite adapted to our times?
We are not recommended to you know, get funded from state budget, but in personal level, yes. No.
Because, for instance,
I mean, PEN International doesn't recommend you really to work with governments, etc., etc. But I mean, yes, we never received any money from state budget, so I have no idea.
The Romanian PEN is kind of a rogue organization without any kind of support, and we have very tense relations with, for instance, the old Soviet time, communist time Writers' Union. I mean, between Writers' Union and the Pen Club, there are all kinds of frictions. So I would like to continue your idea that I think we should give an answer to this. How can we make culture for these politicians, for these elites that control money, and how can we make them understand the importance of culture nowadays? Because almost all the people I know have the impression that culture is just a burden, something that takes resources from the budgets and not a system of production. I got this, what do you produce? What is culture? What is that? Okay, literature, shows, but what's that? And we are living in a time of accelerationism, and culture seems to be too static. What can we do to put things in motion again? That's something that I'm trying to answer to this question since 2009. I don't have any answers. I have some intuitions, but first of all, I have my work and my practice as both as a writer, a Romanian writer, a European writer, and a citizen of the world, and as an organizer and curator and a small engine for my small world. But besides that, we're living in very, very complicated times, and Romania is not a spot right now. We have 8 more days till some very complicated and maybe decisive elections.
In short, from political side, the dictators would like us to have artistic autonomous kingdoms. They don't have problems with that. They would like us to be on the right side and not to be victorious. I think it doesn't matter for Putin if we are on the right side. Or if many Russian artists and writers, I have always problems with them because they claim that they do not have anything in common with Putin. Yeah, and they are not responsible for nothing. Yeah, because they are artists and writers. That's how Putin grows and keeps the power. Because he only wants to think that the fear by the dictator is David, the small things, we can do. The second is that we can be victorious. So that at stake will be not that we are right, but that we are victorious. And the third thing is that we can prove that being on the right side has an effect in the daily life, that we are efficient in that. And we can believe and prove it. When Milo, when I was recently in Serbia, in Belgrade, they invited me to this opposition TV station. We were after Polish election when we abandoned Kaczynski government, and the question was how you made it. Yeah, you had church against you, you had all public media against you, you have this conservative party, you know, so powerful. How it happened? And what is the difference between Serbia and Poland? And one of my answers was that because you have in former Yugoslavia, there was published a book by brilliant philosopher Konstantinowicz, Philosophy of Palanka, yeah, Filozofia Palanki. Yes, yeah, and it was yes, very strong narrative against nationalism, yes, growing in former. But the case is that the source of this nationalism usually is in small town, in the provinces. So you believe that all evil with nationalism comes from the provinces, so you should be a citizen of Belgrade, cosmopolitan town, and that, so the difference is that we were successful in this struggle because we decentralized our country and we have strong local communities, small cities voting against this. Yeah, in Serbia it was unimaginable that opposition, you know, strong field could be in small town. Yeah, not only in Belgrade, in fact. Yeah. So you have, this gives you the picture what the practice of small centers of the world can make. Yes, which kind of impact that they also can reframe, you know, the political spectrum in the country, because otherwise you have this belief, okay, I'm liberal, I'm going to Belgrade, yes, I'm going to the capital and leaving behind. So my answer to that is start the change where you are. Start the change, you know, and the second lesson is, and what Monica was saying about, you know, these cultural circles, how they react when you are brave enough to defend your values. Where, that you should be against the people. That you, as an artist, you know, for example, we are publishing the book about crimes Poles did during Holocaust against Jewish neighbors. And the perspective from the people of culture, from the centers in Poland, in the world, was that we should be persecuted by local community by publishing them. So their willingness to help us is to make us heroes because we were brave enough to publish it, but be against the people around because they are anti-Semites, xenophobes, and so on. So the scenario for us was to leave this small town as soon as possible. That was the you know, the real reaction. You publish it, you should disappear. You publish it, you will be kicked off. Our effort was to stay. Not to be hero in New York and Warsaw, but to be, you know, with people, continuing work and trusting that even if they are now, you know, having these anti-Semitic attitudes and so on, maybe after 5 years of the work, maybe after 10 years of the work, it can change, at least. And second thing, I'm not in position to judge them for that. You know, I'm in the position to develop some talk and work together. Yes. So the answer to you, Monica, about reading and involving people in reading, in culture, and so on. One of the answer I have is to do it together with them. So to build a performance of their story. Don't worry that they will not understand, but just invite them to share and to create the book or the performance or anything together with them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Artistic people to do it with people in villages. One of my friends once coming to my village told me, Monica, you have ended up so good. From where have you come from? So this is
to make them part of this work.
We're trying. We will do it.
The process. So saying all of that, you see, is still because that is another pattern from modernity. If you are brave, avant-garde, innovative, you lose contact with people. Yes, because that's the necessity of that. So the concept of small center of the world is to stay with people, is to be with them for long term and to build it together in a way as it is possible. And
isn't it necessary to be conformist for a while so they can understand you?
I've never been conformist.
I think also
Claudio,
that's not necessary.
Because and they don't expect, if I would start to be conformist, Claudio, they will kick me out.
That's also,
Yeah, you see? So they respect you, even if they disagree with you, but they respect you if you are staying yourself and truthful, with that. And then, of course, and at the same time, you have this willingness to talk with them, yes? Not to judge, not to do others.
Yes, I have this example in my case, my village, since it was the massacre during the war by Serbs. And I remember in national television talking about killing of Aleksandra Zec, which was a girl in Zagreb killed because she was a Serb. And my neighbor called me like, but Monica, why did you talk about that when, boys were killed here in the village? How come? Why? And I'm like, yes, but this is the story that was, it doesn't, I know who they are, but that we have been through, we are aware who is the winner and who won the war. But now, if we won the war, we have to take responsibility for the casualties we did. And we were not doing, and I explained this to him, and he was in the camp during the war. And he said to me, okay, I can understand. So it's not that hard to talk about things if you are straightforward with the people. And now I'm starting a new project in my high school in Petrinja. I will do a feministic workshop with students to help them make their own stories and maybe even little movies. I have to see who is capable for what, about strong women in history, from mathematicians to writers. And they were opened so much about it. And it's a small, and it was devastated, as I told you, and it's still not rebuilt during the earthquake. So this kind of, and it is my, school, it was my place where I used to be. And they're opened for any kind of what would be the word, cooperation. So I think this is, yes, the good way to start, but not to take out your ideas. I think that they really need in this time to hear about feminism. So I will bring out the stories I think it's important to hear and make them do it their way. And it's a good way to start, yes.
About those small centers, province, Before, when we were the entire Yugoslavia was such a diverse country, from Vardar to Triglav. The differences were huge in standard, in cultural wise, religion wise. And then when we split, and I will talk from Serbian perspective, we had to forget about former identity and reinvent the new one. So people were not familiar with their someone said like, okay, from today you are Serbian, you are Orthodox, or you are this and that. But now, like after all that, it was like the big problem for a long time. But now, what these mass student protests showed us is actually, you know, like that small communities took action against, let's say, pollution of the environment by those concerns that want to build like lithium mines. And it didn't start in Belgrade as usual, that all the ideas are like from Belgrade kitchen. No, those people, like they were like grassroots movements, because they are endangered. They are people who are there for, I don't know, like many generations, and they actually wanted to stay there, and they wanted to do do the agriculture and stuff. And then like the elite regime from from Belgrade, they go there like to support them, but it's like, you know, it's like stupid support. Like I come as an actress and say like, oh yeah, you are so cool, like keep on doing that, and I come back to my you know, like big apartment in the city center. And people were kind of pissed off because of that approach. And only the ones who really took the action and stayed with them, you know, and profited for them, they started to, like, they were the ones who would people listen to. And now it's like the huge first time you hear at the television, you hear different accents. You hear like students talking with their accents. They're not anymore ashamed of being from, like, I don't know, southern villages, you know. It's complete change, you know, like, and the respect they get from people from first time, like, big cities are kind of silenced. And also, they met each other, like students from Novi Sad or from like southern universities in Niš, or they didn't know each other, and they said like, oh, okay, so he's studying in Niš, so yeah, it's like some B-League university, you know. And now that solidarity among themselves spread around, and you could feel like that empathy, you know, like in like dark times. We had that only once that I remember during NATO bombing, that people were kind to each other on the street, you know, like that everybody would like pay attention to you. Oh, okay, you go first, or first time. And this is the second time the atmosphere is like that, that people are going and they're nice to each other, because those young students show that it's possible, because they are free from that elitarian approach. They don't even talk that way, and they don't want to be addressed that way. And they are saying the same, like, okay, like, we are doing, but join us. Like, we need the entire society to join the protest. And the only sectors that were 100% engaged from the beginning is like educational sector, schools and universities. And that's it.
I have, if you allow me, Veronica, to say last lesson. I want to share you in short of the war and about my loneliness, and why, thanks to Ukrainians, I'm not such alone as I was before from the war, from Yugoslavia time, when I felt it for the first time. And it is another, Claudio, type of autonomy we did in our Western culture, was to separate beauty from good, and to say, and for me it's a kind of a Handke case, that doesn't matter what your political stand is, what your human stand is, you are a good writer, you owe to receive Nobel Prize. Don't. No, from that time, and at the beginning, I was feeling it like a disability, that something happened for me. You know, during the siege of Sarajevo, when I was there, and Karadzic with these guys from the hills, like, snipers, but it was, this Russian writer, Limonov, shooting to us, yes, yes. From that moment, I couldn't separate these two things. Something happened like, the bite that you, and what is interesting, in my small town, Handke would never receive the prize. They don't have problems with that. They can't imagine how you can separate it. That to say that, okay, he's, talented in painting, but what he's doing with his mother, or, it doesn't matter, or a separate thing, yes? So I think it's more, and then war in Ukraine came with this big work of Ukrainians to bridge these two things, not to separate these things, which is, I think, a lesson of the war. Somehow, that's what the war is doing with you, that you again have it together very, very strongly. And if I'm thinking about the future of culture, we are, foreseeing something. I try to imagine that there will be no coming back after all this experience. Even I think in our European Western discourse now, after the war in Ukraine, there will be very hardly to imagine another Handke to receiving a Nobel Prize. Something happened. Something happened with us, with young people with whom I discussed all this issue, and they were attacking me, about making a case of him. But then they started to be activists on the Belarusian border and came to me and saying, listen, I couldn't imagine somebody telling that this woman from Iraq is making scarves by herself to show media that she is suffering, like Handke was doing with Bosnian women, that they are just showing this suffering for cameras of the Western world and so on. But the smart way of people like Handke was, just to undermine the truth, to relativize it. He is not saying that, not Serbs did Srebrenica, but he is saying, who knows? We are not sure. Who knows? Yesterday I saw Kusturica being on this war parade in Moscow. Yes? And he's a director of Russian Army Orchestra and so on. And the case was, when I was looking his movies, about Bosnian war with my friends from Bosnia, it was completely different perspectives than we had. He didn't understand anything from his movies. Yeah, the ones, but second was that everybody was guilty. The war in the picture of Kusturica was that everybody is fighting with everybody, and there is no, as Ostap was saying, black and white. Yeah, when everybody is guilty, nobody is guilty. Yeah, and for me, it's a clear consequence that he is now with Putin. There's nothing new. Yeah, that there is an iron consequence of that. When you start to play like that, you end up with Putin. Yeah, so that's a very important, because this is, we are not talking now, but it's a lot of talk. I started to talk, Claudio, about this, about Eliade case. From Romania, I remember this time when we published Mihai Sebastian diary. Very painful, yes. Why intellectuals were so involved in fascism? Yeah, and this question is still, yes, and so on. So, of course, we don't have time now to to elaborate all of that, but I want to show, open up also this context, yes, that something is changing. That because of the position of Ukrainians, of war in Ukraine, it is
I can feel at least this influence that we understand more, that it's not so easy. I remember in Moscow it started, you remember this case when they announced the prize of Kandinsky Prize in art, modern art, and the winner was a fascist artist from Russia. Yes, and in jury, there were members of Guggenheim Foundation, of Deutsche Bank Foundation, these liberal intellectuals, artists, and so on. And the narrative was, why you are judging him that he is ideological fascist? He is a good artist. And we are living in the world of free speech. Yes, so why you are judging? And they gave him, the Kandinsky Prize at that time. And now, of course, he's one of these fascists, working for Putin's ideology. So that was not about Russia. That was about the Western attitude of free speech, how they understood it, yeah, and so on. So these are the cases. Of course, when I'm saying that, somebody was saying, but don't you think that you are angel? Yes. That it's not, everybody of us has shadows, sins, weaknesses, and so on. This is not about that. Yeah? It is about feeling, about understanding that there is a connection between our artistic cultural work and ethical dimension of that work, about our responsibilities, about our moral statements and so on. And of course, I remember why we did this separation, because it was too much ideology and morality, artificial. And there was a justful claim of intellectuals to be free, from this artificial moralistic, very often church. But the question is, what happens with us after that? Yes, and what's this separation between beauty and good and truth did for us? And so it is, I'm saying it as a part of the concept of small center of the world, because this is the milieu we can recreate these unities also in a very honest, truthful way.
So thank you so much. Yes, very much so. Thank you so much for all the discussions. Yes, one more voice. Yes? Okay. Because I'm very happy I'm allowing another voice.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to extend the time of our discussion, which was so interesting, but your most recent words actually provoked me still to say something, because this is something I've noted at the beginning of your lecture. There is one thing, I think it was Ostap who mentioned today that wartime produces and what happens in Ukraine, but of course, which has much more global consequences. It is important to remember and to remind, and in Ukraine it makes it very clear-cut that black is black and white is white, and there is a stark difference between truth and lies. There is no post-truth, and there is no, truth is a matter of attitude. It is a wartime thing, and actually in Ukraine we now have wartime culture, but not only in Ukraine, I believe. There is, the First World War was dreamed of at the beginning as the war to end all wars. The Second World War was the war to end all wars. This one is not. It's clearly not for a long time. At least in Ukraine, there is an understanding that as long as Russian Federation in its current shape and form exists, we will always live at the frontier of a potential conflict. So it's like protracted threat we should live on the boundary of, trying to preserve what is truth and what is democracy and what are rights, but at the same time
it is a warlike culture is with us for quite some time. Wartime culture is with us. But it also envisages this understanding that there are implications of what people of culture do, as you just mentioned, Kusturica and others. It's not even about being in need of deal with issue of beauty and truth. It is just that at the wartime, there are more clear distinctions. Who is on which side? It's not to make censorship, to make yourself censored. It's not about that. It is what side are you taking in the conflict, which has some sort of epic proportion. I've heard quite many times in Ukraine that we're living in freaking epic times. Like we have this epos, which is bloody and terrible, but we have heroes which are heroes, like proper heroes. We have suffering which is suffering with capital S. Yeah, I think it changes the attitude towards the issue of responsibility of cultural actors. And as long as it's not Ukrainian story, it's at least European or much more global story. I think it is true about cultural activities of people far beyond Ukrainian borders. And you mentioned the issue of big numbers and small numbers. I remember when at some point I was fascinated with Wallerstein, as controversial as he started already to be. But I remember when, of course, when I read in my first years of my first degree in 90s, his words that in the point of bifurcation, where the system goes into the period of instability, the seemingly small actions of seemingly small group of or groups of people can shift the system into this or that direction. And it's not necessarily political group or political actions. It can be about any active group of people in whatever important realm of human existence and of social existence. And I can hardly imagine more important realm than a cultural one. It is also tied to the issue of responsibility. When someone says, well, you know, I didn't envisage the consequences of my actions, of course, no one can see all the consequences which might derive from our actions. But at the same time, it a little bit smells of hypocrisy when someone just said, you know, I do what I do, and I don't care about the consequences. In wartime, you cannot say this. You cannot. You should always think about the consequences. Among the consequences, you've mentioned also peacemakers. I just found it ironic. We have this Ukrainian controversial project, which is a database of collaborators, those who collaborated with Russian occupying forces, which is called Peacemaker. But there is an ultimate actually meaning to that there will be no peace without justice, at least some sort of justice. And this is also another narrative which is deeply embedded now in Ukrainian society. And just to conclude, I would like to conclude with what you started with, and which echoes a lot what Oksana Zabushko said yesterday, which was her topic. You quoted that the history of Central Europe is about fight for its own subjectivity. And currently we are in the period when Europe has to fight for its own subjectivity as such, in political terms, in security terms, but also in cultural terms. So all Europe is Central Europe now, because now it fights for its own subjectivity. Yeah, I just wanted to say this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now officially we end with the sessions.